Chapter 1's Hong'an, Beijing, China. The high defensive west wall of the Forbidden City could be seen from the meeting room for visiting heads of states in this Hong'an. Whereas the Forbidden City was a wide-open tourist attraction that had millions of visitors, this Hong'an was a secluded community of official buildings adjacent to the city. It was the most guarded place in Beijing. There were hardly any public details given out on the zone. In essence, it summed up Chinese governance: strict and secretive. Today, the taunt nature of the establishment was taken a step further. Two visitors had entered the premise in an unusual manner. Only 4 of the security personnel knew of the visitors' presence. Ororo and T'Challa, the leaders of Wakanda, were escorted into the heads of state's meeting room. At the time, the Premier of China was entering through a door that was on the opposite side. The elected Premier was in charge of the military and the governing council. He wore a communist-styled suit jacket and the expression of a strict schoolmaster. He was in his late 50s. "Good morning," he said and bowed. Ororo and T'Challa followed the custom and greeting. With the formalities out of the way, the Premier went straight for the jugular. "Have you come here to further insult me?" he asked directly. "You have to explain in more detail because we surely don't know what you are speaking about," said Ororo. "You didn't send this?" asked the Premier, sharply. He thrust forward an opened envelope. Ororo took it and read the contents aloud. "If you want to keep the Sky Dragon laser a secret, be at the following coordinates and await further instructions." She didn't read the rest of the note, but passed the document on to T'Challa. "We did not send you that," said Ororo bluntly. "We came here to discuss how you would remove the laser from over Wakanda," said T'Challa forthrightly. "Why would we send this beforehand?" T'Challa was a large muscular man, and so his physical presence was imprinted on a room before he even spoke. Lesser men were intimidated by that. The Premier folded his arms and walked to the window. He chose his words carefully. "I've thought about it. Believe me, I have. Kindly give me back." He outstretched a hand to T'Challa and the Black Panther returned the document. "So someone other than us knows about the satellite weapon. Then we have to find this person," said the Premier. He placed a stress on the collective aspect. "Yes, we do," said T'Challa. "Still, you have to remove the weapon. For that to happen, you will have to remove your hider machine." "One cannot happen without the other," said the Premier. "Please have a seat and we can discuss this in a civilized manner." T'Challa and Ororo complied and they sat on the lone sofa. The Premier took up a position on the nearby seat. "Now, your hider machine can remove cities, whole countries, and throw them in another dimension. My scientists say that the technology is based on extreme teleportation. You claim that the machine is for security purposes. Notwithstanding that, you once lost control of it. So we had to put things in place in case the machine was used on us. The laser would strike Wakanda in retaliation," said the Premier. "All that has changed. We haven't had a breach in security again. The machine is perfectly safe," said T'Challa. "You can say that now, but based on your current lifestyle I cannot take that as a guarantee. We also have powerful and capable enemies who may use your machine," said the Premier. He raised his hand. "Nothing in this world is completely secure. You do realize that we can blast that laser away," said Ororo. "We are affording you a chance to remove it on your own. You will not destroy it because that will draw suspicion and you don't want the truth out, much like us." The Premier leaned back. "Your country started this arms race. Now you want to dictate any responses to it. You cannot have it both ways. And if this person," he raised the document, "lets out the secret, then China will have all sorts of weapons pointed at her because of the fear of what will happen if we lose control of the Sky Dragon. We understand, said Ororo. I want to wait until this person is found before I make a decision, said the premier. That's not acceptable, said T'Challa. That's non-negotiable, said the premier. And that concludes this meeting. My people will work on our end, and if we have anything worthwhile we'll share it with you. He rose and bowed. Thank you, he said, and left through the door. T'Challa looked across at Ororo as if to say, can you believe that? Ororo shook her head in dismay to agree with him. I could laugh right now, she said. Well, let's get this person and put this issue to rest, said T'Challa. His hypervision caught the snipers moving away from the darkened windows from across the courtyard. Ororo's electrical view of the environment picked up on the listening devices that were around the room. They had been turned on as soon as the premier had left. Let's go, said Ororo. They exited the room and a general escorted them to the government car in the underground basement. The heavily tinted car had a local chauffeur and one police escort. T'Challa and Ororo kept silent because the Wind Rider had signaled that the vehicle was bugged. The couple made the most of the trip to the docks. They took out their kimoyos and worked on whatever projects they respectively had. They didn't bother to send any messages from the kimoyos since those may be intercepted. Occasionally they made face gestures to communicate. The chauffeur would glance back at those moments. And T'Challa would tell him in a commanding tone and in Chinese, keep your eyes on the road. The dockyard was perfect for the secret trip. The various foreign spy agencies mainly focused on the international airports for special arrivals. The Wakandan boat was a small cruiser that had flight capabilities. The interior was enclosed and the vessel had a sleek frame. The car halted on the dock and the couple got out. Then the car went away. Ororo wore a cap to conceal her natural white hair. Causal clothes covered her slender and curvy figure. T'Challa also wore causal clothes. He was 6 foot tall and had a peak human physique. Several large container vessels were in port and the Wakandan ship was at the far end of the dock. As the couple walked hand in hand, they observed the various names of the ships that carried cheap manufactured goods all over the world. Upon arrival at their boat, T'Challa said the password and the vessel opened. Then the couple entered. Set a course for Wakanda, Ororo told the onboard computer. The boat powered up and it gently moved from the dock. Was the premier lying about the document? Asked Ororo. Not that I could sense, replied T'Challa. I'm guessing the Mandarin is behind this, said Ororo cheekily. Or someone with the Chinese military, said T'Challa. Or the Hand. The couple went into the cockpit. The boat was now in open water. Flight mode, said T'Challa. Wings expanded from the sides of the boat and the body was raised from the surface of the water. The engines roared as the craft gained speed and then elevated. Once in the air, the craft leveled out. In any case, we have to plan for the worst, said Ororo. T'Challa went to the mini-food compartment. He took out an apple and a knife and handed them to Ororo. Then he got one for himself. It would be a shame to have to deal with a whole new arms race, said T'Challa, before he chewed on a slice of apple. That's money diverted to more intelligence gathering, said Ororo. And we don't have that much to go around in the defense budget for this quarter. At least we would know where it was going, unlike some of the money that we donate, said Ororo. That Orid affair is still bothering you? Yes. They promised to monitor the money. We even went in to check and still most of it disappeared. I can't forget the look on Morrison's face as he expressed shame about the level of corruption in his country, said T'Challa. I think we should be more selective next time, said Ororo. I had the notion that officials would be fearful of stealing money donated by us for projects. What gets me is that they don't consider it stealing. They are just taking their cut. Their percentage, said Ororo. At the detriment of their own people, said T'Challa. I doubt that they considered them their people. It's every man for himself, said Ororo. You know, we should replace every official in a country that we suspect with drones. You're joking, right? Asked T'Challa smugly. Just hear me out for a minute. We replace the officials with drones with the knowledge of the head of state. T'Challa rested his hand under his chin and grinned. The unions will probably protest. Then too bad for them, it will be for the public good, said Ororo. Playing devil's advocate here, the drones may be considered foreign labor entering the bureaucratic structure. Then who will train the drones? The same people that they will be replacing. We'll think of something, said Ororo. Then again, which country is going to admit that it can't run its affairs? If they need drones to carry out some tasks, then why not replace the whole government structure with drones and get rid of the civil servants? Or we could do what we did with Aranzi and clone the head of state, thereby controlling the country on our terms, joked Ororo. But it was a bitter joke. She didn't like that they had resorted to conning the world in order to save Aranzi from its insane ruler, Alex Soberk. The mood in the conversation changed to a dark tone. We promised never to go down that path again, said T'Challa. I know, said Ororo seriously. Well, so far the clone is working. T'Challa said those words with a sour taste in his mouth, because the scientist that pioneered the Wakandan clone technology had done a disgusting deed in order to refine it. It was a matter that placed a blemish on T'Challa's thoughts about using the clone, no matter if it was being done for a good reason. With regards to the real Soberk, he had been T'Challa's foil. He was equally influential in world affairs, powerful and a part of the superhero community. It was their ideologies that set them apart. T'Challa was a selfless person while Soberk was an egotistic showboater. Let's make a date to check up on Soberk's resting place, said Ororo. Would tomorrow be good? Asked T'Challa. That would be fine. And we'll eventually have to do something about Balthazar. I'm not comfortable with him being still free, albeit that he's dormant for now, said T'Challa. It will take a serious containment spell to keep him. A part of me doesn't want to hurt him, though. It wouldn't hurt to speak with him, said Ororo. That's a next thing. I don't feel the clone could fool Balthazar, said T'Challa. What are you basing that on? A gut feeling. At least we got the clone to allay the world's fears about Balthazar, said Ororo. For the time being, said T'Challa. Soon the aircraft was entering Wakanda's airspace. The couple was heading for their home in the interior but had to make a detour to the administration building, because a sealed document had arrived with their names on it. Strange mail, said Ororo. Can't we get a normal day once in a while? Normal? What's that? Asked T'Challa in jest. Ororo nudged his shoulder and laughed. At the office, T'Challa and Ororo scanned the foreign mail package in private. The package had come through the system created to help other countries. Ororo checked for electrical activity associated with a bomb and she found none. T'Challa's hyper senses discovered nothing out of sorts. No sense, no fingerprints, said T'Challa. Perfectly sterile. He opened the package. A note was inside of it. The message was written in bold typeface and it stated, I know your secret. Soberk is your clone. If you want this to remain quiet, meet me in person. No disguises. The coordinates are. The location was the same as the one the Chinese were supposed to meet their blackmailer. Someone thinks they are pretty smart, said Ororo. We should check on the real Soberk just in case. Maybe the blackmailer assumed that we would do that, said T'Challa. Whoever it is must be probably 3 steps ahead of us. You're assuming that this is a lure. He may not have anything concrete and he's pushing buttons to see our reactions. Correct, said T'Challa. Only you and I know about the clone. So the blackmailer might be someone who knew Sobek in great detail then. A person capable of spotting the fake, speculated Ororo. Someone that we overlooked. Highly likely. That will be a long list to go through, said Ororo. And the meeting is tonight, so we don't have much time to place surveillance on all his associates, said T'Challa. One thing that the blackmailer didn't count on was our connection with China. We'll inform the Premier that we also received a message leaving out the details, said Ororo. Then she smiled as the mystery solved itself in her mind. T'Challa also smiled at the same realization. This is a setup, said Ororo. The blackmailer is not going to show up. He wants Wakanda and China at each other's necks. Another possibility is that he wants us to do something for him, said T'Challa. Either way, we should go, but cautiously, said Ororo. Then cautious it will be, said T'Challa. By the way, it's actually refreshing to thrash out these scenarios with you. Actually thinking like we do would send someone insane if they couldn't speak to anyone. Ororo went to her desk and dialed the number for the Sobek clone. Usually the clone contacted them each day for a debriefing. I'm checking up on the clone, said Ororo. T'Challa wrapped a pen on his desk and he mentally continued to analyze the situation. He thought about Ororo's point about the confusion that the person intended would erupt between China and Wakanda. Maybe confusion is useful to the person as a distraction, pondered T'Challa. Meanwhile, Ororo listened to the husky voice of the clone. It reported nothing unusual in the past days. Ororo ended the call and a question came in her head. Could he have told someone? Then she blew it off since the clone was completely obedient to her and T'Challa based on the engineering that the couple had designed. He said nothing strange has occurred, said Ororo. All right then, let's prepare for tonight, said T'Challa. They made a video call to the Chinese premier. I was not expecting to hear from you so soon, said the premier. We got a package similar to yours and for the same meeting place. We believe that the person is either trying to divert our attention from somewhere else or putting us at each other's throats, said T'Challa. How can I trust that what you are saying is true? Asked the premier. Trust has to be formed along the line for us to reach anywhere, stated Ororo. All right, say that I do believe you. What is your course of action? Asked the premier. Inform your people that we will be there. The person setting this up will not know about our collusion. We'll see how things go from there, answered T'Challa. Very well, said the premier. Good day to you, sir, said Ororo, and then she ended the transmission. Chapter 2 Oranzi, Africa. The hut was situated at the base of the mountain range that ran along the south border of the country. Inside, Raven and the real Dr. Alex Sobek waited patiently. Raven was in a camouflage pants and grey vest. Her vivid red hair fell on her shoulders. She was in the process of recalibrating the weapons and cleaning them. She wanted no malfunctions for when they stormed the caves Balthazar rested inside of. T'Challa and Ororo had left a teleportation barrier and machine guards at the entrance of the caves. Sobek was on the cot on the other side of the hut. He was reading a book written by an explorer of the Limbo Dimension. The explorer had worked for the organization that Sobek had destroyed. Raven glanced at him. She had given Sobek a pendant that turned him into a human whenever he was not using his magical energy. His human body was not all that fit. There were no bulging biceps and chiseled muscles. He looked like a regular guy who didn't overdo it at the gym. Sobek caught Raven's glance. She turned away when he stared back at her. Then he continued reading. He had no feelings for her because they hardly knew each other. He may have flirted with her during those months that her organization was badgering him, but it was all in innocence. He could sense that she felt nothing for him either. Their relationship was based purely on fulfilling their self-interests. Raven wanted to protect herself from the people hounding her because of the state secrets she possessed on several countries. They wanted her dead. It was Soberg's fault. After he had destroyed the organization, its affiliates reassessed their situation and decided to go their separate ways. Soberg had killed most of the personnel in the headquarters and Raven was the only survivor. Soberg looked at his watch. There was still a long way to wait and he was becoming bored. Even though the book was interesting, it could not substitute human interaction. "Weren't you afraid to enter limbo?" asked Soberg to start a conversation rolling. "Why would I be?" Raven fired back without facing him. "I'm just asking. Have you decided on my offer as yet?" "I made up mine 2 hours ago," said Soberg. Raven paused and turned to him. "Well, you can run your operation from Aranzi," said Soberg. "No strings attached," said Raven. "No strings attached." "Perfect," said Raven, and she resumed her work. "Now tell me something. What is your background? You know all about me, but you're a mystery to me. I don't like to talk about myself, so can you drop it?" said Raven. "Fair enough, but these people who are after you, weren't they target your loved ones to get your attention?" "Nice try," said Raven. "I'm just trying to be polite. I could do a truth spell and you'll spill everything," Soberg joked. Raven looked over her shoulder and gave him a cut eye. The truth was that she was nervous, because victory was so close. She had learnt about Soberg's exile from the clone's mind. In the vision she saw the landmarks that were around Soberg's resting place. She knew it was the limbo dimension. She got maps and other information for a rescue mission. Since it was the Black Panther and Storm, chances were they left a monitoring device or a guard. With that in mind, Raven retrieved a beast from the organization's remote lab and she took it to the limbo dimension. She was correct about the guard, and while the beast did its job, she broke Soberg out. Once Soberg was returned to power and her position solidified, she would approach the same people who wanted her dead and offer them a deal. Still, before any of that happened, she needed to wait a few more hours. Soberg would be cocky throughout. She could count on that level of self-confidence he possessed. If only she knew that it was pretense. Soberg continued with the book. Inside he itched to use his mystical powers. He was also nervous because Balthazar may become confused on seeing two Sobergs. "Think positive," thought Soberg. He briefly remembered the moment he awoke to Raven's urgings. He thought it was a dream. "Get up," she had shouted. He rose and after a few fact-finding questions he followed Raven's lead. She told him to create a portal back to Earth since she had no means to. Still, she knew exactly where they were headed. Soberg took them to the hut that they presently used. Raven then started the next phase of her plan, distracting the Wakandans. Soberg teleported her all over the world for the plan to be a success. She sent the messages to China, Wakanda, and a third country. China was chosen randomly, but the third country wasn't. Soberg learned a few things about Raven from the manner in which she ran the operation. For starters, she took great risks. Even with the rescue attempt, she based everything on the hope that he would be able to teleport them. Secondly, she did not know entirely what she was doing. Sometimes she made haphazard decisions. Soberg put that down to stress. What he didn't understand was the reason she wanted to work with the people seeking her head. What was really her motivation? Soberg rested the book on his chest and he looked at his hands, his human hands. Oddly, he felt no great relief. He had accepted his previous disfigured form. Still, he saw the benefit of turning into a human-looking person every once in a while. Soberg shifted his thoughts on the clone. "That creature is sleeping in my bed, basking in my glory," mumbled Soberg. "You said something?" asked Raven, turning to him. "No," he replied. "Not to you. Are you done with the book?" Soberg watched it. "Yes. And remember to leave T'Challa and Ororo alone when everything is completed. They will be tied up for years with what I did," said Raven. "How can you be sure of that?" Soberg asked with a slight rage. He wanted to eliminate the Black Panther and Storm. Politics changes daily. Enemies become allies and vice versa. "Trust me. This will stick," said Raven. "There will be no getting around this for them." "You better be right," said Soberg in finality. "I know I'm right because their biggest weakness is that they overanalyze things," said Raven. Soberg looked at her with interest. "Well, go on," he said. "Once you make them believe that you are ahead, they will overcompensate to overtake you. They will look at different scenarios and find plots within plots. In essence, they would have overlooked the simplest explanation. You really are crazy to believe tricking T'Challa and Ororo is so simple. Have you ever heard the expression that your strengths are your weaknesses? That was how my organization was able to take down the foes that were 100 times greater than us," said Raven with pride. "I'm willing to give your theory a try simply because I failed with my last tactics against them," said Soberg. "You will not be disappointed," said Raven. "Trust me, they will not see this one coming." Chapter 3 Vienna, Austria. The Glossing Cemetery was on the eastern side of the city. The bright headlights of a car came through the north side gate. The car drove onto the narrow lane that ran across the cemetery. The vehicle slowed and stopped in front of the statue that was in the center of the cemetery. The Chinese agent exited the vehicle. T'Challa and Ororo were waiting in the darkness. The agent sensed them and he shined a torchlight on the couple. Ororo was in her black combat uniform. T'Challa was in the ceremonial Black Panther habit and the computerized time and space sword was magnetized to his back. The couple exchanged eye contact with the Chinese agent. He had arrived on the allotted time for the meeting. The agent was slim-built and had a clean-shaven face. He wore a trench coat due to the damp weather. In a relaxed manner, he looked at the sky. The Chinese spy satellites were in place over the cemetery. So too were the Wakandan spy satellites. T'Challa and Ororo even had 2 drones stationed a block away from the cemetery in case they were needed to follow someone or provide assistance. T'Challa recognized the Chinese agent from the superhuman program that China had created. The agent was the most powerful one from the group. Within a minute of the Chinese agent arrival, another car entered the cemetery. "This could be it," Ororo whispered to T'Challa. The car halted near to the Chinese vehicle. The driver kept on the lights and came out. He wore a heavy jacket, but his face was easily identifiable as he was one of the most famous men in the world. T'Challa couldn't believe it. "Steve," he said. Steve Rogers aka Captain America was in a stern mood. "T'Challa, Ororo," he said emotionlessly. He stared suspiciously at the Chinese agent. "Who might you be?" "That's not important," answered the Chinese agent. "Steve, what are you doing here?" asked T'Challa of his family friend. "I could ask the same of you. But I'm under orders to help capture anyone I meet here." "I'm afraid that's going to be you," said Captain America. "Steve, wait, let's talk about this first," said Ororo. "I'm sorry. I'm following orders," said Captain America. I wish there was an alternative, but I too want some answers. T'Challa heard the background noises of helicopter engines and military boots entering the cemetery. S.H.I.E.L.D, said T'Challa. Not S.H.I.E.L.D, something far worse, commented Captain America. Ororo sensed the approaching danger and she rose majestically on a wind current. Out of the darkness appeared the Mystic soldier. It flew past Ororo and swung around. She was shocked to see America's newest weapon so soon again. Did the American government set us up? It seems unlikely, thought Storm. The Mystic soldier aimed one hand at her and the other at the Chinese agent. The silver machine fired energy beams. Storm dodged the attack although the energy grazed her. Likewise the Chinese agent flew out of the danger. The humanoid Mystic soldier fired lasers from its eyes that struck the Chinese agent, knocking the man unconscious. I summon the mist, said Storm, and atmosphere reacted to her appeal. The isolated mist concealed the cemetery. Ororo rose higher, only to be impeded by an invisible force field. We're trapped, she muttered. The Mystic soldier was at her heels. Aroundzi, Africa Raven, and Sobek battled through the 24 robot sentinels that guarded the passage to Balthazar's cave. Sobek in his magical form was unstoppable and he took the lead. His skin was hard and brown. His eyes were a luminous green. Raven trailed behind with rifles and grenades launchers. An emergency alert was sent from the caves to T'Challa and Ororo, but the force field blocked the transmission from reaching their Kimoyos. After 6 minutes, the battle was over. Sobek called out to Balthazar. The head of the gigantic mystical creature rose out of the earth. Its head was flat and dragon-like. Sobek, it has been so long since you last called on me, said Balthazar in a thunderous voice. I was captured by an enemy, said Sobek. Tell me who did this to you, said Balthazar in anger. I will take you to their accomplice. We'll deal with that one. He wears my face, shouted Sobek. As he spoke, Raven dropped a note on the ground. Sobek then teleported them to the great house which was the seat of power in Aroundzi. The clone was standing on the balcony when Sobek and Raven appeared. Sobek's powers were no match for the clones. This is the one, said Sobek forcefully, hiding his fear that Balthazar would hesitate. The clone turned sharply to the intruders. A moment later an unseen force had ripped him to shreds. What of the others? Asked Balthazar. We'll deal with them in time, right now we have other business to attend to, replied Sobek, and he looked at Raven. She stared back him, knowingly. Everything was going according to plan. Sobek then teleported them in a sphere of fire to meet with the people who were hunting Raven. The Gosling Cemetery, the Black Panther and Captain America squared off while the battle between Storm and the Mystic soldier occurred overhead. T'Challa had known the super soldier for years and had considered him an ally. I don't want to fight you, said T'Challa. It's out of my hands, said Captain America. He removed the jacket. He wore a blue military uniform. The famed circular shield was attached to his back. Then I will give you an option, said T'Challa. In a flash, the Black Panther leapt onto the statue and somersaulted into the forest of crosses and other religious symbols. He told the sword to teleport him and storm away from the scene. But the force field prevented teleportation. T'Challa heard Captain America coming behind him. Steve Rogers was also a peak human. The star on his shield shined in the flashes of lightning that Ororo manipulated. Use your shield, thought T'Challa. The Black Panther ran to the side to catch Captain America's attention. Then T'Challa sprinted away, he kept one eye on the Mystic soldier. Steve released the shield and it bounced off multiple surfaces on its way to T'Challa. The Black Panther sensed it. He turned swiftly and detached the sword. With a baseball bat swing, T'Challa knocked the shield towards the Mystic soldier. Chung! Vibranium titanium alloy had struck Asgardian metal. The Mystic soldier had received the blow to the head and it stopped. T'Challa called Ororo on the Kimoyo as he continued his escape. "Honey, meet me at the south side, we're breaking out of here." "It would be quicker if I picked you up," said Ororo as she swooped down, having spotted T'Challa. She manipulated two mini tornadoes that took up the Chinese agent and T'Challa. In a burst of speed she carried them to the south wall. They were ambushed by laser fire from a shadow unit on the ground. T'Challa pressed a button on the sword's handle and the nano-robots that sheathed the sword raced into the hilt. "Where's the force field?" he asked Ororo. Storm sensed it. "Just ahead." "It is unlike anything I've come across," she said. T'Challa made a diagonal slash and the dark force blade caused a large tear in the force field. Upon exiting, their Kimoyos received the distress message from the Aranza caves. "We have to get there," said Storm. "On it," said T'Challa. They were teleported into the cave network. They came upon the strewn remains of the robots. Ororo rested her husband and the Chinese agent gently onto the ground. "Did you learn anything from Steve?" asked Ororo. "Nothing," said T'Challa. "I think his handlers were also duped. For America to send both him and the Mystic soldier," said Storm. "Now what happened here?" T'Challa sniffed the air. "Sobek was here and someone else." "The clone." "No, the real one," said T'Challa dreadfully. He saw Raven's note on the ground and picked it up. He read it aloud. "My name is Raven. I'm a telepath. If you are reading this, it means I've won." "Don't bet on," said T'Challa as he crumpled the note in his fist. "Raven," said Ororo. "The person we overlooked," said T'Challa. "T'Challa the clone," said Ororo. The couple teleported to the Great House. It was not long before they came across the remnants of the clone on the balcony. "It's unlike Sobek to not stay around to gloat about his handiwork," said T'Challa. "We've been outthought on this one," remarked Ororo. "And I was wrong not to follow up on your suggestion to visit Sobek," admitted T'Challa. Ororo didn't say anything. "We'll have to take a step back and access this thing in entirety," said T'Challa. Then they teleport to Wakanda. Chapter 5 The White House, Washington, D.C. President Bollinger was totally dissatisfied with the failure of the operation. It was apparent on his face as he listened to the debriefing from the security advisor. "Did Captain America's link with the Black Panther affect his performance?" asked Bollinger. "I'm not sure in all honesty," answered the security advisor. "Okay. Still, what occurred verified the intel. China and Wakanda were making a deal about our Spire project," said Bollinger. "I want a thorough search for Wakandan spy apparatuses that are stealing state secrets in all agencies pronto. If you can't find anything, then it means that you weren't looking hard enough." "Yes, sir," said the security advisor. "Also, I want every major river checked for any of those dormant Wakandan stealth ships. This nation has dragged its feet too long with Wakanda, and in that time they have planted themselves in our country." "Well, those days are over," said President Bollinger. Next story, State Secrets PT2 Chapter 1 The U.S. African Operations Center. The room was cramped for space, something that the analyst and the supervisor complained about to themselves. 5 mainframe computers and 7 screens took up most of the space. It was not the exciting job that was portrayed in Hollywood spy movies. This was intense, uncomfortable work done secretly in the basement of the center. Langley called periodically for updates and they were fed the same answer: no activity. That changed at 11:05 p.m. "Sir, they are doing it," said the analyst, who monitored the spy droids on Wakanda's northern border. "Good God," said the supervisor as he rested his coffee on the table, and he headed to the analyst. "Bring up the satellite images so we can see the whole thing." In a world with mutants, superhumans, and all manner of creatures running free, there were still a few amazing feats that took the breath away from people. One such feat was Wakanda's ability to teleport to another dimension. The analyst recorded the time while he watched a blue transparent cloud form around the country. The night created an eerie atmosphere as the cloud continued to build. Suddenly lightning streaked in all directions within the cloud. Then, like that, the country was gone and the cloud remained. The Haven Dimension, Taku, Wakanda's chief scientist and operator of the Hider machine, had always been loyal to his childhood friend T'Challa and his wife Ororo. When they had hurriedly told him to activate the Hider machine, he didn't hesitate or asked for a reason. He just followed the order. Now that the country was safely in the bioatmosphere dome, he called his friends to find out why the country had taken the precaution. Were they under attack? The administration office, T'Challa had barely settled at his desk before the call came through from Taku. "Yes, it was a cautionary move. We'll give more details in the national address," said T'Challa, and he ended the call. He was in his Black Panther habit. His brown eyes flickered over to his wife. "Which will be what exactly?" "That we lied to the world in order to protect it and it has now backfired on us," said Ororo as she sat on her desk. Her blue eyes were focused on her husband. "Backfired, more like blown up in our faces," said T'Challa, and he unfolded the crumpled note from Raven. He handed it to Ororo. "Why do you think she left it?" asked T'Challa. "She wants to show that she is cleverer than us," said Ororo. "Also, it must be another part of the manipulation." "How so?" "She wants to hurt our pride. That would impact on our decision-making and play right into her hands," replied Ororo. "Clever girl, but who is she?" "We can get that from Soberk," answered Ororo. "Since he can't attack us here with Balthazar, most likely he'll return to the Great House. We can snatch him there. It's best we get our Amor to protect us from his spells," said T'Challa. A few moments after, T'Challa's sword teleported the couple to the vault. Tokugawa Island, Japan. The legendary mystical creatures, both good and evil, that lived in Japan were disturbed by Balthazar's sudden appearance around the country. The night was filled with tension as the creatures waited for anything to happen. The 8 human travelers crossing the bridge from the mainland to Tokugawa Island were aware of Balthazar's presence due to their respective talismans. Could Soberk be in town? They pondered in their own way. Soberk was the magically superpowered leader of the African nation Aranzi, and he was the only one with influence over Balthazar. Each traveler was a spy master and the head of a barely known department in their country's spy agency network. All the travelers lived by one code to safeguard the lives of humans by any means necessary. They had belonged to a larger organization that was unfortunately destroyed. So the question on their minds was, who summoned them to the meeting? The 8 men and women drove into the courtyard of a guest house on the south side of the island. The house was traditional and the lights were on inside. The 8 spy masters didn't acknowledge each other when they alighted from their cars. The presence of Balthazar and the unknown caller of the meeting meant that there was a chance of a double cross. The stoic spy masters entered the guest house, and standing in the foyer was the last person they had expected to see, Raven. They were even startled to see that Soberk was next to her. Raven was a red-haired telepath who the spy masters had placed a hit on. She wore a black suit and gloves. Soberk was in smart traditional African attire. His skin was brown and hard. His eyes gave off a green gleam. Soberk's presence caused a silent panic in the travelers. He now knew their identities and it was near impossible to have him assassinated. "Good night. You are here to discuss the fate of the world," said Raven commandingly to seize the traveler's attention away from her partner. "You have some nerve," said a pug-haired spy master. He turned to leave. "Put your pride on hold," said Raven in a sharp tone to the man. "What did you say?" The man stopped and stared at her. "You are supposed to be dead, cleaned up with the rest of the mess when the organization disappeared. Yet I remain alive. I survived your assassins," said Raven. "What do you want, girl?" "My time is very valuable," said a short gray-haired elderly woman. Raven's eyes flicked to the professionally dressed woman. "First of all, I'm a grown woman. Secondly, I want to restart the operations of the organization," said Raven. The woman gave a condescended laugh. "I referred to you as a girl to point out your lack of seniority and experience. You were a low-level operative, a tool. Now you want to speak directly to us. Secondly, what in heaven's name made you believe that we would sanction you bringing back the organization?" she said. "I worked with the greatest spy master that ever lived. And I believed in the values that the organization stood for. The world needs the organization and I intend to return it with or without your blessings," said Raven. "What does he have to do with this?" asked another spy master, his focus on Soberk. "Aranza will be the location of the organization," replied Raven. "This farce gets better and better," commented the woman. "Listen. I have already accomplished what none of you have ever done, as a demonstration of the seriousness of my cause," said Raven. Her tone made the spy masters check themselves. "As you may or may not know, there are 5 doomsday weapons in the hands of 5 governments," Raven continued. "There is Wakanda's Hyder machine, America's Spire, Great Britain's Avalon, China's Sky Dragon and Aranza has Balthazar. With regards to America, we were concerned that not enough adequate security was given to prevent the Spire from falling into the wrong hands. So I orchestrated a ploy that will see that the problem is fixed and currently it is working. Forgive me if I find this all too convenient," said another spy master. He was the tallest. "You were in charge of monitoring Soberk for the organization. The day Soberk demonstrated his control over Balthazar was the same day that the organization was destroyed. Don't try to fool us, dear. This was your plan all along." "That is far from the truth," said a calm Raven. "You know what? I have heard enough, so I'm leaving," said the pug-hair man. The others moved to leave. "You do know that Balthazar is here, right? That I can have him kill you and that I'm letting you walk out of here alive," said Raven. "Seriously, child, if you loved the values of the old organization and care so much about the world, then in the same way you know our value, hence you would have never tried to persuade us. So your threat of killing is muted," said the elderly woman. The group left and on reaching their cars contacted their respective assassins. The kill order on Raven was put on hold until the new development was properly analyzed. Then the 8 hurried to get out of Japan before Raven changed her mind. "Aren't you going to say something?" asked Raven. "There's nothing to say," said Soberk. "Other than I want to help you now more than ever just to stick it to those old gas bags." Raven wiped her forehead. "Take me to the base," she said. Soberk extended his hand. "Madam." Raven held the coarse hand, and the two disappeared in a sphere of fire. Balthazar sensed his friend's absence, so the invisible and intangible creature uncoiled itself from around Japan, and it teleported into the ground beneath Aranzi. Raven and Soberk appeared in a skyscraper that was on the edge of Aranza's second city. "You can go now," said Raven as she looked around the cluttered room that they had rematerialized in. There were boxes with computers, wires, and tools on one side and a satellite monitoring system on the other. "Is that all I am to you now?" asked Soberk in jest. "No, I didn't mean to sound like that," said Raven. She sat by the satellite surveillance computer monitors. "But honestly, you hate me, right? For destroying the organization." "No, I don't hate you." "I should, but I don't," admitted Raven. "How is that?" "You did what you had to do. Now I have to deal with the fallout." "I think I'm punishing you enough by having you finance the rebuilding of the organization," replied Raven. "Punishing?" said Soberk absent-mindedly. "Right now, I feel for a cigarette." "As a medical doctor, I strongly advise against that," said Soberk. Raven sucked her teeth. "Well, enjoy your cigarette. I have a call to make." "T'Challa and Ororo? I told you stay away from them." "No. Machida. I need something from his country," responded Soberk. "Be careful around him. He is as treacherous as you are," said Raven. "Then we'll work quite well together," said Soberk. "Good night." "Wait," said Raven as she scanned a satellite display on Wakanda. Soberk came over her shoulder. Wakanda was gone. "They used the hider machine," said Raven. "They were expecting me to use Balthazar on them," said Soberk. "Ha! Actually, we should be concerned, because they can strike us from anywhere now," said Raven. "You didn't account for this." "Of course I did. It works into the overall operation." "Then why should we be concerned?" "Because it makes good sense to be," replied Raven. "I'll show them that I can also be as ruthless as them," said Soberk. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call my Avenger teammates here," said Soberk. "T'Challa and Ororo can't attack me with the Avengers in the direct line of fire." Raven grinned. "The Avengers will not come to your aid, because more than likely the American government will have them on standby due to Wakanda's use of the hider machine," she said. She pulled up a data package that dealt with the profiles of the mercenaries she wanted. "Stay here for the rest of the night. The press conference tomorrow will ensure that T'Challa and Ororo are out of your hair and their reputations will sink forever," said Raven. "Do you think that they catered for me telling the world about their clone of me?" "Yes, and they'll do all in their power to catch you before the press conference," replied Raven. "If you meet them, don't return here at once. They might place a tracker on you, so I'll have to find a second location to meet you." "I have the perfect spot," said Soberk. Chapter 2: The Great House. Aranza. The direct line to the US president rang without answer for close to 5 minutes. T'Challa and Ororo allowed the shrill sound to continue as they waited for Soberk's arrival. Another phone began to ring in the house. "I feel like we have met our match in Soberk," said Ororo. She was clad in a techno-mystical armor that fitted her curvy and athletic body. Her white hair fell freely on the shiny shoulder pads. "In terms that we cannot get rid of him," said T'Challa. He was also in a techno-mystical armor. His time and space sword was magnetized to his back. The ringing of the phone irritated his hypersense of hearing. "Soberk has been a major problem. We can't prove his crimes, we can't get rid of him, and he's such a white knight in the world's eyes, while our record is so blotchy that not many will heed our warnings about him. It shows our weakness in matters like this. If we were amoral, then killing him would be so simple," said T'Challa. "I don't think killing him is the problem. It is just that we cannot justify it," pointed out Ororo. "Question is, what will happen if another one like him shows up?" "You're expecting that to happen?" "You can never know," replied T'Challa. "I find this whole thing sickening. We have to wait for him to harm or get someone we know harmed before anything can be done." It's like doctors waiting for a cancer to ripen before they cut it out. It's just so messed up, said Ororo. Even more messed up is going to be our relations with the US. Sending Wakanda away was bound to spook them even more, said T'Challa. I wish we could speak with Ballinger like rational adults, said Ororo, that would save so much time and energy. That was what the UN was for, T'Challa joked. By the way, we have to increase our donation percentage to them, said Ororo. They sent me a letter yesterday. You know, in any other country the business of the government would be held up if the leaders were like us, said T'Challa. Could you imagine, trade negotiations, labor unrest and market crashes being placed on the side burner in order to fight Mr. Sinister's latest scheme? The world is lucky that Wakanda is structured the way it is. Mr. Sinister. Now that is the weird name. It must be English, joked T'Challa. Ororo smiled. If he ever met Umba's mother it would be a match made in heaven. Two mutant genetic wizards. More like a nightmare. Let's hope she is still trying to be a reformed person, said T'Challa. The telephones went silent and the house returned to quietness. Now regards to Raven, is she Soberk's lover, accomplice, or does she have some power over him, speculated Ororo. It could be all three, said T'Challa. Say we hand her over to the Chinese, what do you think they'll do with her? Normally a spy would get a long prison sentence, but the sensitivity of this matter means she might be eliminated as soon as possible. So it's her life in exchange for Wakanda's safety, said Ororo. We can always clone her, suggested T'Challa. Ororo studied his tone of voice. You're serious, she said. Of course it will depend on who she really is. I think we are doing too much. In what way? Asked T'Challa. We are trying to avoid potential problems in one area with schemes, and these schemes are causing problems in other areas, explained Ororo. In other words, we are making things bad for ourselves. Exactly, said Ororo. What do you think we should do? Sooner or later we wouldn't be able to put out all the fires, and we will have to make decisions that wouldn't make us sleep easy at night. Even graver decisions than the one we made with Soberk. What about the present situations? We'll leave them as they are, replied Ororo. All right, said T'Challa. Nice self-analysis. Well, thank you, said Ororo. You should write a book on leadership, said T'Challa seriously. Ororo paused. Then she spoke. Actually, that has been on my mind for quite a while. I'm sure it will be an international bestseller, said T'Challa. Then again, it will give my enemies insights into how I think. And they'll know that you are not a woman to mess with, said T'Challa. Plus it will be great for the young ones. I will have to go on tour to promote it, said Ororo. But what's the name? I envisioned something simple like Ororo's Tips on Leadership, said Ororo. Sounds great to me, said T'Challa. I was thinking of writing it on the go, in between my normal schedule, said Ororo. How many pages are you looking at? 1,000 for the most, said Ororo. And you are going hard print or digital? Asked T'Challa. Both. I still think a good hard or soft cover book has a place in the world, replied Ororo. You know what, I agree with you on that, said T'Challa. You agree with me on everything, Ororo said in jest. Well, not everything. I don't agree that you should get the right side of the bed, joked T'Challa. Well, that is something we just aren't going to see eye to eye on, said Ororo with sly smile. You're hard woman, you know that, right, said T'Challa with a grin. He checked the time on his kimoyo. We have spent too much here, though. Time for the sweepers. Time for the sweepers, said T'Challa with a prideful smile. He had designed the disc-shaped devices that combined mysticism and technology. Their purpose was to scan for large levels of mystical energy. They were in essence miniatures of the several Wakandan satellites that also did the same job. "I'll stay here in case Sobek does show up," stated Ororo. T'Challa took up a bag that was next to his foot. The couple kissed, and then the Black Panther teleported to the top of a building that Wakanda secretly owned in the Aranza capital. T'Challa opened up the bag and took out a few of the sweepers. It was the first time they were going to be used in the field. The sweepers levitated and shot out in all directions. T'Challa closed the bag and teleported to the second city. He appeared on another building owned by Wakanda, and he sent out the sweepers. Then he returned to the Great House. "That was quick," commented Ororo. "I wish we knew some other of Sobek's haunts," said T'Challa. "You sound like a detective," Ororo joked. "Me? You were the one who set up a UN mutant police force. They should be calling you Commissioner Ororo. Now that is going a bit too far. I would simply prefer the title Commander," said Ororo. "Commander Ororo, I like the ring to that," said T'Challa. "Now in Wakanda I'm Commander-in-Chief," said Ororo. "So you gained," said T'Challa. "Yes I have." T'Challa's Kimoyo beeped and he checked it. "We have an object in the second city. Do you want to plan an attack?" asked Ororo. "No, it's best to strike now," replied T'Challa. "Then we'll go in heavy," said Ororo, and her eyes turned white as her mutant powers heightened. T'Challa and her teleport to Raven's skyscraper. Chapter 3 I should invest in a teleportation alarm for the entire building, thought Raven as she updated her things to-do list. Sobek was not far from where she sat. He floated a few inches above the ground, and his body was in the Buddha lotus position. His eyes were closed as he communicated on the astral plane with Machida, the spiritual leader and president of another country. "He looks so peaceful," thought Raven. The Black Panther and Storm appeared in front of her. She briefly made eye contact with Storm as a surge of electrical energy left the Wind Rider's first finger. The lightning struck Raven and she fell unconscious. Sobek had barely opened his eyes when T'Challa stuck an anti-loaded syringe into his neck. A headbutt from the Black Panther knocked him flat out. Then Sobek returned to his human form. "It looks like a base of operations," said Ororo as her eyes swept over the surroundings. "Black Ops probably." T'Challa took a look around. He sniffed the air in search of other people in the skyscraper. "No one else is here," he said. Ororo looked at Raven's things to-do list. "She was building up a headquarters here," said Storm. She found a familiar name amongst the mercenaries. "Random," she said. "You sound like you know him," said T'Challa. "I do. I fought against him a few times with the X-Men." T'Challa stood over Raven's body. He remembered that she was a telepath. Then he applied the nanny-ties to her. "That's that," said T'Challa, even though a tough decision faced him and Ororo. "Let's see what she was working on before we speak," said Ororo. "It will also give us a better understanding of her and if we should hand her over to China," said T'Challa. "Or America. She's the reason for the US thinking that we and China were conspiring against them," stated Ororo. T'Challa collected the hard drives and computer disks, then he tossed them into the bag. His Kimoyo beeped insanely. Ororo didn't have to be told that something huge had approached the skyscraper. She felt it in the hostile weather that appeared outside. "Balthazar," said Ororo. "Who dares to lay a hand on Sobek and his companion?" asked a voice that came from an unseen speaker. "No need to answer, for I see into your souls. Balthazar, listen to me. Sobek cares for no other life but his own, shouted T'Challa. That is what you use to judge him? Selfishness is the nature of the world, said Balthazar. But not at the expense of innocent lives, shouted Ororo. Still I am unmoved by your words. I have sworn to protect Sobek and his land. As long as he is on this land he will not be touched. You are still alive because I see a degree of goodness in you hearts. Now be gone from here, said Balthazar. Wait, said T'Challa. I said be gone, roared Balthazar. T'Challa and Ororo felt an invisible force seize their bodies and it squeezed. Their armor could not withstand the pressure and thus were shattered to pieces. Balthazar released them. Don't tempt me to go further. You are not listening to reason, said Ororo. Suddenly she felt the side of her face being thinly cut. Leave, said Balthazar and his voice bloated the room. Chapter 4 Raven and Sobek awoke soon after T'Challa and Ororo had departed. Raven cursed and Sobek gathered himself. Sobek, said Balthazar. I have sent away your attackers. Thank you, said Sobek. Raven continued to curse as she discovered that her equipment was missing. They took everything, she said. What are you rambling about? Asked Sobek. All my files, my plans, they know everything, said Raven. But they can't harm you. That's the most important thing, said Sobek. But I will get an extra satisfaction when I give the press conference. Raven cursed again. How did they even find this place? I have to move now. To where? Inquired Sobek. That second location that you spoke about, answered Raven, and she began gathering the rest of the equipment. Hurry and help me. Sobek grunted, then he aided her. Wakanda, the administration office. T'Challa cleaned the cut on Ororo's cheek. Thankfully it will not leave a scar, said T'Challa. I say we leak all the files to everyone, said Ororo. What about Balthazar? We'll have to work on figuring out that one, replied Ororo, and she kissed him. Now we have to tell the country the reason for the dimension shift, said T'Challa. At least we learned that Balthazar recognizes goodness, and he is only honor-bounded to Sobek, said Ororo. And he broke our armor. I'll have to create another pair. This reminds me of a Cold War. Sobek can't move against us and we can't move against him, so we'll have to battle in other small arenas, said Ororo. Well, your book is going to get special attention after Sobek reveals the clone plot, said T'Challa. How so? Well, people will want to know how hard or easy it was to make such a decision, replied T'Challa. Me? I'll put the whole blame on you, Ororo joked. Trust me, nobody is going to believe that you will go blindly along with anything I come up with, said T'Challa. He used a laser to seal the wound. There, it is finished. All right. Then it is back to work for us, said Ororo. They kissed. Afterwards they addressed the nation. 8 hours later, Sobek held his press conference and disclosed to the world about his kidnapping and the clone, all personally done by T'Challa and Ororo. I don't know what in the world I could have done to provoke such despicable actions. Are they that jealous me? I don't know, said Sobek. Next store, the House of Raven. Chapter 1 The Nohir Space Station. T'Challa once fought the descendant of a celestial killer. The celestial in question was decapitated and its head rested on the edge of the universe. Presently, T'Challa stood in a space station built inside the armored head of that celestial. From a window, T'Challa gazed at what lay beyond the edge of the known universe. Astrophysicists had long speculated that the creation of the universe had not ended and that the universe was still expanding. The window was tinted in order to prevent the harmful rays from the creation process from damaging T'Challa's eyes. His scientific mind knew that the bright yellow and red inferno that filled his vision consisted of quarks, anti-quarks, gases, and electromagnetic forces amongst other things. It was a glorious sight for T'Challa. If only he had the time to examine the process in detail. He came to the Nohir space station on business. He had to get information on a being called the Dragon of the Moon. One of the denizens of the space station was Moon Dragon, and she was connected to the Dragon of the Moon. T'Challa thought that the information would be readily available, then he and Ororo could have returned to Earth quickly. However, things seldom run so smoothly. Moon Dragon's friend was touched by the Dragon of the Moon and had since fallen ill. Moon Dragon, being a telepath, ventured into the friend's mind and was stuck there when T'Challa and Ororo arrived. Moon Dragon's father, Drax the Destroyer, didn't want anyone to interfere with the matter, so T'Challa and Ororo weren't allowed to speak with Moon Dragon. Regrettable, thought T'Challa. T'Challa and Ororo decided to wait a while in the hope that Moon Dragon and her friend would awaken from their trance. While T'Challa went to the observatory section, Mantis and Groot, other dwellers at the space station, had taken Ororo to the nature reserve. T'Challa checked the time on his palm-held supercomputer called the Kimoyo, or Spirit. The couple was almost out of time. "Maybe Moon Dragon will come to Earth and meet us," said T'Challa. Red lights flashed in the observatory section and an alarm punctured the silence. "Residents of the Nohir, please proceed to the shelters. I repeat, please proceed to the shelters. Guardians of the Galaxy, assemble in the war room," said Cosmos over the intercom. T'Challa raced out the observatory room and he headed for the war room. He expected Ororo to head there too, since she was in the company of 2 Guardians of the Galaxy. The space station had many teleportation terminals that transported people throughout the levels. T'Challa waited his turn as an alien had reached the terminal outside the observatory before him. The alien was one of the varied species that lived on the space station. The alien disappeared on the teleportation pad. Then it was T'Challa's turn. The control panel stood vertically off the ground. Since mathematics was the universal language that was used in the space station's computer controls, T'Challa dialed in the code for the war room. He stood on the pad and was atomically disintegrated and sent to another teleportation pad in the war room. He emerged in the midst of a strategy meeting. Cosmos, the telepathic dog created by the Russians, had been explaining the situation. Then Star-Lord, the human alien cyborg and the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy, spoke. He gave orders to Quasar, a human empowered by energy wristbands, Adam Warlock, a humanoid created by human scientists to be the perfect human specimen, Mantis, a Vietnamese supreme martial artist, and Nova, a human member of an intergalactic Peace Corps. All these humans protecting the universe, thought T'Challa. Ororo stood next to the diminutive rocket raccoon, a raccoon genetically enhanced with human intelligence and motor skills. Ororo acknowledged that she saw T'Challa and they met halfway across the room. They didn't speak, as that would have interrupted Star-Lord. "Thanos must be kept in Area 7, commanded Star-Lord. "Now go." With the exception of Cosmos, the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy left the war room. Star-Lord turned to his guests. "I assume you're coming along," said Star-Lord. "You guessed correctly," said Ororo. T'Challa knew of the eternal deviant called Thanos. Thanos lusted after the cosmic personification of death, and he tried to win her attention through mass destruction. "Then you'll fill in for Drax and his daughter," said Star-Lord. T'Challa had gathered from the meeting that the Guardians were attempting a surprise attack on Thanos. The being had entered Area 7, which was the flight bay. T'Challa demagnetized his sword that was attached to the back of his ceremonial Black Panther body armor. He assumed that Ororo would use plasma energy from her array of energy manipulations. The couple followed Star-Lord out of the war room. They entered a levitated pod that was used primarily for emergencies. Star-Lord piloted the pod along the empty corridors. The alarm and the blinking red lights continued. "Have you dealt with Thanos before?" T'Challa asked Ororo. "No," she responded. "Neither have I," said T'Challa. "Well, there is a first time for everything," said Star-Lord. He wore a mechanized helmet that covered his face and he carried 2 energy-emitting pistols. "Any idea why he's here?" asked Ororo. "Not a clue," replied Star-Lord. "What is Drax doing?" asked T'Challa. "He's protecting his daughter," replied Star-Lord. T'Challa's hyper-hearing picked up another voice in Star-Lord's helmet. "Probably someone is speaking to him," T'Challa muttered. "Well, that's odd. I just got word that Thanos is not advancing." "He's just standing there," said Star-Lord. "Maybe he doesn't want to fight," said Ororo. "Well, Rocket Raccoon is going to be pissed," said Star-Lord. "Why?" asked T'Challa. "He wants every opportunity to fire off his gun," replied Star-Lord. "He's trigger-happy," Ororo remarked. "That's putting it nicely," said Star-Lord. "He's the most volatile member in the group." The team arrived at Area 7. "All right, gang, let us make ourselves known," said Star-Lord. T'Challa assumed that he spoke to his fellow warriors. The Guardians of the Galaxy emerged from their respective hiding places. Thanos looked them over with indifference. Thanos was 8 feet tall and burly. His skin was tough like a hide, purple in color, and it absorbed cosmic energy. "I'm here for Moondragon," said Thanos. "What do you want her for?" asked Star-Lord. "It has to do with the Dragon of the Moon," replied Thanos. Chapter 2. Ororo was suspicious of Thanos. She had heard incredible stories of his bloodlust. "What a waste of life," thought Ororo. She was aware that Thanos's race was created by Celestials in their quest to find mutants like her. Thanos had an ugly face in her opinion. It was not so much the facial features but the lack of warmth. Thanos seemed to carry the very coldness of outer space on his visage. If his eyes were an indication of his soul, then it would be absent, for there was nothing lifelike in his pupils. Thanos' voice was heavy. "Where is Moondragon?" he asked. "She isn't available," said Ororo. "You mentioned the Dragon of the Moon. My husband and I are also interested in that creature." Thanos looked at her like a complete stranger. "Who are you?" asked Thanos. "Storm from the planet Earth," Ororo replied. She sensed that Thanos sized her up. "What is your interest in the Dragon of the Moon?" asked Thanos. "He is connected to a creature called Balthazar," replied Ororo. Thanos chewed over the name. "I've heard of such a creature," said Thanos, and then he addressed the Guardians of the Galaxy. "The Dragon of the Moon is being held prisoner and it called out to me. It told me to get Moondragon and I shall." "You're not going anywhere," said Star-Lord. "Think before you act," said Thanos. "If what you are saying is true, then fighting us will consume valuable time and energy," said T'Challa. Thanos looked at the Black Panther with curiosity. "Listen to him, Star-Lord," said Thanos. "Give me Moondragon and I'll go." "Actually, I meant for you to leave without Moondragon," said T'Challa. "Better yet, we'll verify your story," said Star-Lord. Ororo noticed that Rocket Raccoon was in a fit of rage. He looked odd in his tan spacesuit and with the large laser gun in his right hand. He pointed to Thanos. "I want nothing to do with him," said Rocket Raccoon. "He's a backstabbing lunatic who we should put down right now instead of jabbering." "All in due time," said Star-Lord. "Right now I want to know who is holding the Dragon of the Moon. I'll go with Thanos and check on things." "T'Challa and I will be coming also," said Ororo. "I don't have time for tourists," said Thanos. "We are more than capable of taking care of ourselves," said Ororo. "Also, we are not the only ones who know about the link between Balthazar and the Dragon of the Moon. These other people that we are aware of may be implicated in the disappearance." Thanos thought it over for a moment. "Time is short." "I agree to your plan," said Thanos. "Let's go to my ship. Cosmos, I will contact you as soon as I have more details," said Star-Lord. Suddenly Ororo felt the sensation of teleportation. The space station disappeared from her sight. She sped through a tunnel that was flanked with various shades of light. She reappeared inside of a spacecraft. She looked for T'Challa and he was standing next to her. Star-Lord and Thanos were in front of them. The spaceship had one room. There were no furniture or visible computer systems. "Kree World 172, Thanos told the ship. Ororo sensed that the ship was moving. She looked past Thanos and she saw an observation window. She witnessed the ships jump into hyperspace. The light from faraway stars suddenly came nearer as the ship propelled forward. A shimmering tunnel appeared and the ship entered it. "Kree World?" asked Star-Lord. "The Dragon of the Moon is trapped on one of the Kree colonies," said Thanos. Ororo was familiar with the Kree Empire. They were humanoids whom had colonized a vast area of outer space. "Dragon of the Moon's vision stated that he was kept there," said Thanos. Chapter 3. Raven took a moment to reflect on the room where she was raised as a child. Her mother Claire O'Donnell and her father Omar Khalid had left her with the Kitati for 6 years. It was an arrangement made between the organization that her parents worked for and the Kitati. Raven remembered the telepathic training she had received from the Kitati telepaths. She had spent joyous moments in the company of the Kitati. "That is in the past now," said Raven dryly. She was not an overtly happy person anymore. She compartmentalized her emotions and kept a constant serious expression. Raven left the room and entered the circular chamber where the Dragon of the Moon was imprisoned. Raven captured him due to a flaw common in some of the great cosmic organisms: they were gullible. Raven had contacted the Dragon of the Moon with the telepathic forces in the structure that she stood inside of. An invisible Dragon of the Moon came and he sensed the evil that resided in Raven. She asked him to become small and visible. He complied by transforming himself into a centipede-like creature that wrapped around Raven's body. Then Raven activated a transgen crystal by voice command and the device captured the Dragon of the Moon inside of it. At present Raven stared at the transgen crystal that was placed on a pedestal. The centipede form of the Dragon of the Moon wriggled inside the long crystal. Raven's intention was to keep the creature trapped forever. "To think it is because of you that the Lords of the Light built Balthazar," said Raven, and she rested her hand on the crystal. She remembered the story that Balthazar told her about his transformation. The Lords of the Light had noticed the destructive power of the Dragon of the Moon on Neptune. In order to prevent the same outcome on Earth, the Lords of the Light asked a high-level Earth entity to sacrifice himself to guard the planet. Balthazar took up the responsibility. The Lords of the Light later found a way to depower the Dragon of the Moon, and that they did. However, the Lords of the Light never returned Balthazar to his original form and they abandoned him. Raven ran her hand along the smooth surface of the crystal. Technology and mysticism had done what the Lords of the Light were unable or reluctant to do. The technology took centuries to create under the organization that Raven now ran. The Kitati that lined the chamber like coral spoke to Raven telepathically and they showed her people who were approaching the structure. Raven saw the Black Panther, Storm, Star-Lord, and Thanos. Raven broke the connection and she pondered on whether she should combat the intruders or flee. She had brought enough high-level weapons to at least take on the Dragon of the Moon. Her weapons were called the Omega-level Threat Extermination Array Olza. They were only activated and worked in the presence of an Omega-level entity due to their destructive and significant powers. Her organization had built the devices under the previous chief, and the fail-safes were placed to ensure that the weapons were not used for any other purpose. Raven sucked her teeth and loaded up the Dragon of the Moon in a levitated container. She secured her gear and left with her prisoner through a door. She headed along a tunnel to where her spaceship was kept. A vine hooked her feet. She looked suspiciously at the vine that ran to the ceiling. Suddenly Raven was yanked into the air by the vine and pulled upward. She desperately tried to find the nearest weapon, although it was too late. A telepathic surge broke through her mind and she lost consciousness. Chapter 4. The Kitati coated the rocky tower like algae. Thanos saw no entrance, so he intended to blast his way through. "Stop that," said Ororo. Thanos returned his hand to his side and he looked at her as though he was insulted. Ororo sensed the electrical life forces in the Kitati. "They are alive," Ororo said. "They are merely plants," said Thanos, and he resumed his attempt to create an entrance. Ororo summoned a lightning bolt from her fingertips and it struck Thanos's hand. "What the?" Thanos said, and he turned towards Ororo. T'Challa got his sword ready. "Star-Lord, find another way inside," he said. Without warning, cosmic energy splashed out of Thanos's right hand at Ororo. She countered with plasma energy and she dived to her right. She felt the flinch of the fluctuation in the time-space spectrum next to her. T'Challa must have teleported, Ororo thought. She looked up at Thanos. T'Challa stood on Thanos's shoulders and held the sword's blade across the Deviant Eternal's throat. "Easy now," said the Black Panther. The twin time-space computers on the sword's hilt, disguised as Golden Panther seals, had teleported him. Thanos was stoic. Then an invisible force moved T'Challa's hand from the Thanos's throat and the Black Panther was lifted into the air. Ororo guessed that Thanos used telekinesis on T'Challa. "Impressive," said Thanos, and he released T'Challa. "I underestimated you, but it will not happen again. The next time both your deaths will be swift." T'Challa landed on his feet and said nothing. Ororo understood that a message was also sent to Thanos. Ororo looked for her Star-Lord. He was passing his hands through the plants. "They are sentient," said Ororo. "My scans also tell me that there is passage behind this specific wall of plants," said Star-Lord. "Then Thanos can use his telekinesis to safely move the wall of plants aside," said Ororo. A slight drip of blood under Thanos's chin caught her eye. T'Challa had cut him. Thanos rubbed the wound as it rapidly healed. Meanwhile, the plants were parted and a stony tunnel was revealed. Thanos levitated off the ground and he flew slowly into the tunnel. The group entered after him. Star-Lord came close to the Black Panther and Storm. "Listen, I don't know much about you. The only reason I trust you is because Nova vouched for you," said Star-Lord. "You have your way of doing things and I have mine, so give me a heads up the next time you want to take on Thanos." "Fair enough," said Ororo. Inside Storm's eyes she saw the great life force ahead of the group. Suddenly the life force grew brighter. Her instincts told her something was wrong. "Thanos, wait," said Ororo. The Deviant Eternal ignored her and ventured into the chamber. A burst of telepathic force from the Kitati ripped through Thanos's mind and left him unconscious. He collapsed with a thud. "Wait," said Ororo, as she held back her husband and Star-Lord. "What do you see?" asked Star-Lord. "Life," replied Ororo with glowing eyes. T'Challa touched her hand slightly to gain her attention. Ororo noticed the vines that had grown spontaneously in the tunnel and they had silently wrapped around the group's feet. There is also something in the air, said T'Challa. Ororo became aware of a large life force surge and her mind blanked out. The vines grew until they covered the group's bodies and T'Challa, Ororo, and Star-Lord were spun as though they were in a web. The vines carried the prisoners into the chamber and the Katati converged on them. Chapter 5 Wake up T'Challa, said the 6-year-old girl. She wore a long white dress. Her hair was flaming red and she had deep green eyes. T'Challa awoke inside of a cold room. The sterile environment reminded him of the rooms inside of the techno jungle in Wakanda. The walls were grey and glossy. The lighting from the bulbs in the ceiling was at a medium level. "Where is this?" he asked. The girl touched him slightly as he rose from the floor. "You are in Asha's mind space," replied the girl. "Where is Ororo?" asked T'Challa. "In the next room waiting for you," replied the girl. "Who is Asha?" "She was our apprentice. We have to save her." T'Challa checked his person for his weapons and kimoyo. He still had them. He gathered his thoughts on the situation. He wasn't too sure if the girl spoke the truth. He couldn't remember the last time that he was telepathically trapped in someone's mind. He assumed telepathy was involved because it was the only possible way to link mentally to people that he knew of. "Come this way," said the girl. T'Challa studied her face. She seemed familiar to him. Apart from the hair and eyes, her facial features indicated that she had mixed blood European and something else that just didn't come readily to mind. "What is your name?" asked T'Challa. "We are the Katati," responded the girl. T'Challa vaguely remembered the word. He knew that the word was associated with aliens, although he was unsure where he heard it from. "Where are Thanos and Star-Lord?" T'Challa inquired. "They are not required," replied the girl. She approached a wall and a door opened for her. "Please come quickly," she said, and went into the next room. T'Challa followed her. He saw Ororo and a similar 6-year-old girl. Before the adults spoke, the girls walked to each other and then merged into one being. The new being was a slightly older girl. T'Challa and Ororo embraced. The warmth in their bodies felt very real to T'Challa. "We are inside someone's mind," said Ororo. "I know, the Katati told me," said T'Challa. The girl came and stood in front of them. "You will meet Asha now," said the girl. A space between the couple and the far right wall rippled like water when a stone is thrown into it and Raven emerged. She glared at T'Challa and Ororo. "Raven," said T'Challa. "You know her by that name and we know her as Asha, the child who we trained," said the girl. Raven remained silent. As you can see, Raven no longer shows emotion. She feels nothing. "Not even hatred," said the girl. T'Challa realized the girl was actually a younger version of Raven. "Why are you doing this?" asked Raven sharply as her eyes fell on the girl. "You have gone from the sweet innocent child to a cold creature similar to the Kree. We don't want that for you, Asha. You must reclaim your soul. It is the only way that we will allow you to leave," replied the girl. "I told you that I don't want to," said Raven. "That's why we brought these two inside," said the girl. "Hopefully they will get past the guards that you have created." "They are my enemies," said Raven. "We know, however, they are strongly linked to you," replied the girl. The girl pointed to the left wall. "Your journey starts here. There are 3 thoughts behind 3 doors. When you are finished with one thought, another door will open." A door opened in the wall and the girl disappeared. Darkness was on the other side of the door. "Who are the Katati?" asked Ororo. "For reasons for our survival, I will answer the question. The Katati were CO inhabitants of Halat. The other species was the Kree. The Kree were heartless warriors and they hated the plant like Kitati. The hatred led to the near extinction of the Kitati, replied Raven. T'Challa was suspicious. The entire thing may have been an elaborate scheme. He wondered where Star-Lord and Thanos were located. We are inside your mind, then you can control what is going on, said T'Challa. No. The Kitati are in full control of everything except my defenses, said Raven. Defenses like what? Asked Ororo. Armed soldiers, replied Raven. They protect my buried thoughts. The Kitati want me to dig up those thoughts. And you don't want to, said T'Challa. Raven said nothing and gave a stare of disapproval. Well, I have no intention of staying inside your mind forever, said Ororo, and she approached the door. T'Challa followed her. He looked over his shoulder and he saw that Raven stood rigidly. T'Challa turned back around to Ororo. Are you buying this? He whispered. A bit, replied Ororo. But how did she reach this far out here as a child? Probably the same way that the humans on the Guardians of the Galaxy did, by chance. What is the plan? Asked T'Challa. We get past the guards and open up Raven's secrets. They may give us insight into her schemes. I doubt that she will stubbornly allow us to get away without her intervention. I wonder if she has anything to do with the disappearance of the Dragon of the Moon, said T'Challa. Balthazar may have told her that he and the Dragon of the Moon are connected, said Ororo. I'm surprised that she was able to capture Dragon of the Moon, said T'Challa. If she was working alone, said Ororo. We underestimated her before, said T'Challa. I know, said Ororo. In a strange way her introvert nature reminds me of your attitude sometimes. T'Challa smiled. He did go into a shell from time to time. All right, based on Xavier's teachings, once we are inside someone's mind there are rules to be followed. All feelings of pain are real. Gravity and geometry can alter at any moment, said Ororo. Most likely her hidden thoughts will be a stronghold. Be on the lookout for a building or a safe. The couple walked through the door and came upon a war zone. The sky was covered with black clouds. Burning war tanks and dead bodies were on the ground. T'Challa and Ororo looked back at the door, it was still there. Raven was coming towards the doorway. She seemed disinterested. Do you want to stay here for an eternity because of fear? Asked T'Challa. The taunt had no effect on the young woman. Where should we go? Asked Ororo. Find out for yourself, replied Raven. You make it sound so difficult, said Ororo, and she rose into the sky. A thermal wind current picked up T'Challa as though he was a leaf. The wind that was manipulated by Ororo brought T'Challa next to her. I'll fly north to that mountain range, said Ororo. I'll keep an eye out, said T'Challa. He intensified his hypervision and he surveyed the battlefield. The war tanks were like the ones used in the modern US Army. The terrain resembled the ones in Iraq or Afghanistan. The couple passed over the base of the first mountain and T'Challa spotted a Japanese-styled house. There, said T'Challa as he pointed out the structure. Ororo and T'Challa descended in front of the house. T'Challa sensed another presence on his left. Raven stood a few steps away from him. You look surprised to see me here. This is my mind, after all. That means I can travel faster than you, said Raven dryly. T'Challa, said Ororo to draw his attention to the 4 android guards in the house's veranda. What do you think? I think they have rapid self-healing, weaponized energy emitters, electromagnetic protection, above average speed and strength, replied T'Challa. The regular variety, said Ororo. I'll take the 2 on the right. A thick mist suddenly fell around the house and T'Challa knew that it was due to Ororo. His vision allowed him to see clearly in the mist. T'Challa drew his sword and he attacked the androids on the left. The Black Panther sprang from the yard and into the misty veranda. He swung his sword into one of the androids. Automatically the android parried the blow with a large energized blade from the top of his hand. "You didn't think that I would make it that easy," T'Challa overheard from Raven. The second android created an energized blade like a scythe and he swiped at T'Challa, drawing blood from the Black Panther's back. "Move faster," thought T'Challa. He made a small jump and became perpendicular to the floor. His feet locked around the first android's head and twisted it off while he buried the sword into the second android's head. T'Challa dropped onto the wooden floor. The flooring creaked as the mist subsided. T'Challa recognized Ororo's boots and he stared up at her face. She was holding her jaw gingerly. He looked back at the floor beyond Ororo's legs and he saw the two androids. They were organically repairing their torn bodies. T'Challa quickly rose. He applied pressure with a finger to a nerve center on Ororo's back and it alleviated the pain in her jaw. Then Ororo turned to the door. T'Challa heard noise behind him and the androids he damaged were in repair mode. "We have to hurry," muttered T'Challa. He kicked the locked door with force and it failed to open for him. Raven came to the door. "Let me," she said and touched the door. It immediately unlocked and opened. The group entered and T'Challa closed the door. The new scene had a 13-year-old Raven, 2 closed coffins and a man dressed in a U.S. Admiral uniform. "What is this?" asked Ororo. "My parents' funeral," mumbled Raven. Chapter 6. Raven remembered that she had returned to Earth a year earlier and even then she had not seen much of her parents. The Admiral spoke to the 13-year-old girl. "Your parents died doing their duty for Earth. I'm sure that they would have wanted you to excel in the organization and make them proud." Then he walked away and vanished from the scene. The sad girl soon faded away like a ghost. Raven took a deep breath and then she went to the coffins. She read her parents' operational files when she had restarted the organization. The parents had perished on an interdimensional expedition. Raven opened the coffin on the right. The battered face of her father appeared. He had short curly hair and a rough beard. "This cannot change me now," thought Raven. "It is too late. Too many years have passed." Blasted Kitati. She was trained by the Kitati as a part of an exchange of knowledge between the organization and the aliens. Her latent telepathy was worked on and she became skilled in it. Raven closed the coffin and she looked at T'Challa and Ororo. "I will complete the journey on my own," said Raven. "Like we are going to let you," said Ororo. "You don't have a say in the matter," said Raven. She imagined a wall between her and the couple. Instantly a thick metal wall appeared. Then Raven removed the mental blocks in her mind and a door appeared in front of her. Suddenly the 6-year-old girl popped up and blocked Raven. "I don't need them anymore," said Raven. "We disagree. They give you impetus. You will continue the journey with them," said the girl. Raven sensed that the wall was removed so she turned around. T'Challa and Ororo stood calmly. Raven snared at them and then she passed through the door. She walked into a white room where a 16-year-old version of herself was being taught the value of human lives by a woman. The woman left and she went into the observation booth at the side of the room. The Admiral was inside the booth and he looked on emotionlessly. Raven remembered that for weeks she was grilled on the importance of humans and her responsibility to protect them. Another girl was escorted into the room by 2 masked men. She was handcuffed and placed on a stool. The girl's name was Martha and she was Raven's friend. They had met a week earlier in the training center. A television monitor was lowered from the ceiling and it showed a mass of people walking in downtown New York. The woman in the booth spoke to Raven and said, Asha, this girl intends to murder these people on the screen. You must eliminate her now. The Admiral's eyes were glued to Raven. You must kill her now, said the woman. She's my friend, said Raven meekly. We discussed this at great length. Protecting 100 lives outweighs the value of one life, said the woman. Kill her. No, said Raven, crying. The Admiral folded his arms and he said, Asha, look at the monitor. See those people? They are your responsibility. No one else but you will have to save them right now. Don't follow your emotions. Follow the facts of the matter. Those people have loved ones waiting for them. You have to ensure that these people are not harmed. Kill her. The order reverberated in Raven's mind until she couldn't take it anymore. She sent a telepathic pulse into Martha's brain and killed her. The scene rapidly withered away. Ororo and T'Challa flanked Raven. She sensed their sadness that was probably for Martha. Raven walked away from the couple. She learnt recently that Martha was not a real person. She was a man-made humanoid that was merely a tool in the training. Raven had locked away the memory because it showed that her actions afterwards were programmed. That she was a simple tool for the organization. The last door appeared and Raven briskly entered the next room. A 4-year-old version of Raven stared back innocently at the adult. The child represented her conscience and compassion that she had buried so that she could function in her work. Raven pushed the child roughly out of her path. Katati, Raven shouted. This changes nothing. I chose to be the way that I am today. But you can go back, said the 4-year-old girl. No, said Raven. Tell me something. The Kree nearly wiped your kind out because they were more brutal than you. What if one of your kind stood up against the Kree and massacred them as they did to you? My duty is to be as brutal as the enemy. If I have to kill one child to save 1 million people, I will do it. You don't mean that, said the girl. Yes, I do wholeheartedly, said Raven. Now let me go. The girl was stunned. Tears welled in her eyes. Let me go, said Raven. They tricked you, said the girl. They were right, shouted Raven. We are in a war where total victory requires us to function based on the facts and not our emotions. You are not welcomed here anymore, said the girl. Raven huffed. If you are interested in protecting humans, then why don't you work with us? Asked T'Challa. You are the enemy, said Raven coldly. There were volumes of works on the matter of meta-humans that the organization had collected and written. Those works made it clear that humans and meta-humans were always going to be at odds with each other. Raven agreed with the perception even though she was a meta-human. Goodbye, Asha, said the girl. Darkness enveloped Raven and the couple. Chapter 7. Thanos woke up in fury from a deep sleep. His telepathy automatically scanned the vicinity and by chance it connected with the Dragon of the Moon. The beast showed the path Raven had taken to get to her ship. I'm coming, said Thanos. As a youngster, the Dragon of the Moon had indoctrinated Thanos into evil. The madness made Thanos murder his mother. I owe everything to you, said Thanos as he teleported to where the Dragon of the Moon was kept. Meanwhile, Raven had been leading the Dragon of the Moon's container to her ship. She had awakened a short while before and gathered herself. She quickly made ground over the rocky terrain to the small spacecraft that was in her sight. Thanos teleported next to the container. Raven and the Deviant Eternal made eye contact for a fraction of a second. Raven's Autlza activated when it detected Thanos's presence. He channeled cosmic energy at Raven and it engulfed her. The Autlza absorbed the cosmic energy and drained Thanos of the amount that he had stored in his body. The transference took half a minute. Telepathically, Raven turned on the hammer glove on her right hand. She jumped onto the container and she leapt at Thanos with her right fist aimed at his jaw. Contact was made and Thanos fell flat onto the ground. Raven dropped next to his head and sprayed a vapor into his face. He tried to use telekinesis and telepathy on her, but the ults nullified them. The spores that he inhaled rapidly weakened him. Raven took out a quantum nullifier and pointed it at Thanos. "You are on my kill on sight list. Right now you have two choices. You can die or you can perform a deed for me," said Raven. Thanos was so stunned by her prowess that he didn't know how to answer. Chapter 8. Ororo took a moment to ensure that she had returned to reality. The transition from Raven's mind was so abrupt. T'Challa and Star-Lord were with her in the chamber. She looked around for Thanos. "Where did he go?" she asked. "I don't know," replied T'Challa. "But I have Raven's scent. She went that way." He pointed to a tunnel. "What happened to us?" asked Star-Lord. "And who is Raven?" "We'll tell you later," replied Ororo as she ran into the tunnel. "No," said Star-Lord, and he stood. "Our priority should be Thanos. Raven might have the Dragon of the Moon and Thanos may be after her," said T'Challa. "This issue of trust again," said Ororo as she halted. "Yes," said Star-Lord. "You go on, I'll contact the Guardians." "Do what you must," said T'Challa. "We are going forward." Ororo and T'Challa entered the tunnel. Ororo was satisfied that the tunnel was wide enough and air was sufficient for her to create a mini tornado. She concentrated on the pressure inside the tunnel and she heated the air. The tornado came alive and it lifted her and T'Challa off the ground. Then the tornado accelerated. The couple exited the tunnel just as a spacecraft settled in the sky and then shot to the upper atmosphere. Thanos stood on a boulder and he stared at the couple. Ororo shut down the tornado and the couple landed gently. "Thanos allowed her to go," thought Ororo. Chapter 9. Thanos usually honored his agreements once they were within reason. Raven promised to keep the Dragon of the Moon safe in return for his services. It was nothing too complicated. He just had to get rid of T'Challa and Ororo in Raven's special way. With the restored abilities, Thanos mentally ripped the sword from T'Challa and flung it to the other side of the tower. Simultaneously he telepathically overcame the psi shields in T'Challa's and Ororo's minds that were discovered by Raven when the couple was distracted. Thanos knocked out the couple with a psi blast, then he teleported himself and the captives to his spaceship. The ship was called Sanctuary 2 and it had been waiting in outer space. Thanos gave the ship new coordinates and the vessel shot into hyperspace. Thanos took off all of the couple's equipment and he destroyed the items. The ship exited hyperspace and came upon a small desert planet. Thanos teleported the group onto the sandy surface. Then he wiped specific memories from T'Challa's and Ororo's minds. Thanos returned to the ship and left. His part of the bargain was completed. Meanwhile, Star-Lord searched frantically for T'Challa and Ororo. He had discovered the sword which teleported back to the last place the couple was located. The sword told him of Thanos's attack. Could he have disintegrated them, pondered Star-Lord. He had Nova online and the Centurion was furious that the Black Panther and Storm could not be found. "Stay there, I'm coming," said Nova. "Okay," said Star-Lord as he gazed around for the couple's residue. "There's nothing," he muttered. "They mentioned a person named Raven." "Do you know who that is?" asked Star-Lord. "No," replied Nova. "She may be a part of the mystery," said Star-Lord. "They have to be alive," said Nova. "Sad to say, but it doesn't look that way. Thanos takes no prisoners." "You know that," said Star-Lord. Chapter 10. 30 minutes passed before T'Challa regained consciousness. He noticed a woman next to him. She too was awakening. He didn't recognize her. He looked around at the desert and he didn't know how he got there. "Who are you?" asked the woman with long white hair and blue eyes. T'Challa racked his brain for the answer and drew blank. "I don't know," he replied. "Who are you?" The woman had an equally blank expression. "I don't have a clue," she replied. "Well, we have to get out of this heat," said T'Challa while he shielded his face with a hand. "It does not bother me," said the woman as she allowed the sun rays to beat down on her. "Suit yourself," said T'Challa, and he stood. Everywhere he looked was desert. "Who am I?" he whispered. "What is the name of this place?" He checked his clothes for clues and found nothing. The woman was checking her person for some means of identification. "Any luck?" asked T'Challa. "No," said the woman. T'Challa watched the horizon. "Maybe there might be something beyond it," he muttered. "I'm going in this direction," he said for the woman to hear. "I'll go this way," said the woman as she pointed in the opposite direction. "I think we should stay together," said T'Challa. "Why?" asked the woman. "We don't know each other and I want to go this way." "Go then," said T'Challa and he walked away. The woman then went in the opposite direction. Next story, Ororo and T'Challa, a love story. Chapter 1. She unaware that her name was Ororo and that she was happily married to the man who stood in front of her. She considered the man a stranger. He didn't seem to know anything about her either. He had called out to her when she left in the opposite direction of where he wanted to go. He wished to go north while she wanted to head south of the desert. "It's best that I walk with you, and if we don't find anything then we will head back north," said the man. He was tall and strong. His pigmentation was like hers, brown. His eyes were brown and feline-like. A low crop of hair was on his head. The muscles in the face and the slant of the eyes exuded confidence and kindness. A black suit covered most of his body. In general, she found him attractive. "Okay," said Ororo. "What do I call you?" "Whatever you want," replied the man. "And don't you have a name for me?" "How about Cat Eyes?" She found that weird. "Why?" "Because your eyes are like a cat's," replied the man. "They are also blue like the sky." "Really?" said Ororo. It was like she was born a few minutes ago. She had general knowledge of things like her body, but specifics like how she got on a desert or where she was from were mysteries. "Is something the matter?" he asked. Ororo realized that her mind had wandered off. "No. This is so frustrating. And you also have cat eyes as well." "Then maybe we are related," he said. "I think it is too early to be making speculations. Let's search the place first," said Ororo. "If you can stand the heat." He complained about the heat before while she had found the midday sun bearable. The sky was cloudless, so the full force of the sun was beating down on them. Ororo felt the weather in a strange manner. She felt like she could plug into it and manipulate it. She didn't reveal the sensation to the stranger because she was uncomfortable with him. "Can I trust him?" pondered Ororo. A dry wind swept across her and the man. Unintentionally, Ororo telepathically jacked into the lower and upper pressures that created the wind. She saw the environment in different hues and shapes. The energy flows in the atmosphere became apparent to her. Then Ororo felt a release in her body and she was lifted off the ground by a gust of wind. The wind swirled around Ororo, caressing her, and it carried her higher. She felt that the elements were hers to manipulate. The sensation was delicious. "Control yourself," said a voice in her mind. And she had control. Ororo thought about stopping and the wind obeyed. She looked below. She had a panoramic view of the desert. There was nothing but sand in either direction. Aurora wanted to explore further from the air. Then she remembered the stranger. "Where is he?" she asked while staring at the desert. She descended with ease as though it was natural. "I can move the weather," said Aurora. "How glorious!" She flew down and spotted the stranger. He looked at her with wonder. "How did you do that?" the man asked. "I just did," replied Aurora. "Maybe you can do it also." "I already tried." "Nothing happened," said the man. "Oh well, I will continue exploring on my own from up here." "I'll come back for you," said Aurora. "How will you find me?" asked the man. An idea came to Aurora. She concentrated and extended her hands. She ionized atoms and other molecules in her palms, then lightning shot out. The lightning was followed by plasma energy. In the wake of the energy releases, a hexagon mark was dug into the desert around the man. The mark was wide enough to be visible from the sky. "I'm a weapon," thought Aurora. It felt natural. "That mark will help me locate you," said Aurora to the stranger. She flew off and the need to be uninhibited came on her. The wind ran its fingers through her white hair. She closed her eyes. "Control yourself," reiterated the voice in her head. She opened her eyes. The terrain remained unchanged even though she had gone farther than before. The land was devoid of vegetation and sand dunes rose and fell like static waves. "Can I go faster?" She willed herself and the speed increased. Her instincts forbid it. "Why am I limiting myself?" thought Aurora. "I want to be free." The realization that she could do harm to the world then came to her. She slowed her speed and returned to her original mission, that of finding clues. She wondered if it was best to look underground, but she didn't have the means to do that. Aurora saw a rock formation and decided to land there. Animal and plant life was non-existent near the towering rocks. She noticed that her clothes were still dusty. "I need some water," she said. Hydrogen and oxygen atoms combined over her head and they coated particles in the air, thereby becoming raindrops. Then the water drizzled on Aurora. She looked astonishingly at the white vapor that covered her. "Amazing," Aurora said. She stripped her clothes and felt a natural current flow through her body from the earth. She flew onto a rock and the cloud followed her. "Who am I? Where did I come from?" were the questions that dominated her mind. Then she thought about the man whom she had separated from. Maybe he was behind the amnesia. Maybe the entire thing was a sick joke. "He won't earn my trust easily," muttered Aurora. She allowed some of the water to fill her cupped hands and then she splashed it into her face. "I can bring life to this desert," she said. "First I have to ensure that no one else is here." The mini rain cloud dispersed, and Aurora placed her clothes on a rock for them to dry. She leaned against another rock and folded her arms. "I really don't want to spend the rest of my life here," she said. "I know things and yet I have no reconciliation of the important things. Was I put here because of my abilities? Is this a punishment for a crime that I committed? Then this is a cruel prison." She peered at the sky. Probably her warden was watching. She thought about finding her way back to the stranger. She remembered the exact rotation of the planet, the wind, and the unseen energy patterns at the spot where she left the stranger. Locating him would be easier than she imagined. These are extraordinary talents. What if I was truly a danger to others and I was placed here for their safety? Aurora pondered. Chapter 2. The man's name was T'Challa, but he was unaware of it. The woman had flown off and left him like she expected him to wait there until she returned. However long that would be. Such excitement was in her eyes before she left. He wondered if he could fly as well. Maybe he was not concentrating hard enough. What he did know was that his eyesight was strong. When the woman had climbed thousands of feet into air, he saw her clearly with his acute vision. Does she have the same ability? He wondered. He was aware that the woman had a particular scent. He was somehow familiar with it. The sun's heat intensified. The moisture on his lips was drying. Nourishment came to mind. He surmised that he could go a few days without food. How he knew that was a mystery. He walked back to the spot where he had awoken. He hoped to find clues. Two people could not have been left there without a reason. He just couldn't remember. There were no flashes of memories. It was a clean slate. He bent down to the ground and studied the area with his hyper eyesight. Nothing unusual appeared. The situation was tormenting. He looked to the horizon and saw for the first time a rock outcrop. Without thinking, he rose and ran to the discovery. He found running to be quick and effortless. My body must be built for this, he thought. What seemed a long distance away turned into a light run for him, and he was not tired when he arrived at the site. The 12 rocks were 15 feet tall and egg-shaped. T'Challa budged one of the rocks and it moved. Then his mind started working on automatic. He was going to build a shelter. T'Challa lifted the oversized rock. The muscles in his lower back strained and his biceps became taut. Slowly the rock came over his head and he walked with it to the spot that he had chosen. He was surprised by his strength level and he thought about the woman. She can fly and manipulate the elements, whereas I have hyper senses and strength. Interesting, T'Challa thought. Several minutes later, he had erected the walls of the shelter neatly into a horseshoe shape. The construction of the roof tested his leaping ability. He was not sure how that would work. He held the rock over his shoulder and judged where he wanted to land. Then with confidence he bent his knees, controlled his breath and sprung off the ground, landing with expert balance on the head of a rock. He walked over to the next rock head. By then his calf muscles were burning. Yet he continued with an iron will. He carefully rested the rock horizontally on the others. Then he somersaulted onto the ground. What was I before? He muttered. One thing he took out of the experience was that he was a problem solver. T'Challa completed the shelter and he sat at the entrance. His hypervision kept on the direction that he came from. He still expected the woman to appear. He was naturally attracted to her because she was beautiful. He liked her strong personality also. He concentrated on her image, hoping that it would unlock some kind of memory. The exercise was futile. He took off the upper part of the uniform that he wore. A full face mask was at the top of the uniform. He had taken it off immediately when he had awakened. There were pointed protrusions on the head of the mask which had a cat-like resemblance. The eye lenses were white. T'Challa played with the lightweight material between his fingers and he found that a metal was woven into it. He ran his hand inside of the mask and felt a soft substance at the protrusions. He flipped open the mask to investigate. He found cybernetics in the inner lining of the mask. "What is this?" he asked. "They control something." He put the top and the mask back on. He stood and allowed whatever came naturally to flow from his mind. He heard the sharp sound of claws unsheathing from his gloves. "Weapons," said T'Challa. "Why am I attired like a big black cat, a panther? Is this the cause of me being here? But am I assuming too many things at once? Suppose that I have no real past at all. That I did become conscious for the first time mere hours ago and I am being tested. I might be an experiment. Yet those things don't sound right to me. I was somebody, I just cannot remember who. He thought about sheathing the claws and the weapons automatically retreated into the gloves. So what about the woman, he thought. We may have known each other. Why were the both of us brought here? We woke up in such close proximity to each other, so that there must be a relationship between us. Dusk came and the woman had not returned. T'Challa watched the burst of orange and red as the sun descended behind the horizon. His long-range vision diminished, so he left the shelter and headed for the air mark. His sixth sense warned him that something was amiss. His hyper-hearing picked up a heartbeat that was not his own. The sound came from the sky. He looked up just as the woman flew overhead. She came from behind the shelter. T'Challa surmised that she had circumnavigated the planet. "Down here," he shouted. She spun around sharply and descended. "Did you find anything?" T'Challa asked. "Nothing, we are the only ones here," replied Ororo. "Well, I built us a shelter," said T'Challa. "Us?" asked Ororo with a suspicious look. T'Challa ignored it and got down to serious matters. "We need to talk about our situation," he said. "I agree," said Ororo. T'Challa gestured to invite her to walk with him back to the shelter. "I have discovered that I also have great abilities that are mostly physical," said T'Challa. "I found cybernetics in my mask that control weapons in my suit, and the suit itself is a type of body armor." "So what?" asked Ororo as she walked next to him. "Considering your power set and mine, I think we were warriors," replied T'Challa. "Or dangerous people who needed to be kept away from others," said Ororo. "You think that we were criminals? We obviously did something wrong to warrant such a punishment as this," said Ororo. "But that is assuming that we came from a place that has a proper value system. I don't feel any dark emotions within me. What about you?" T'Challa noticed that the woman was introspecting. "Actually, I do feel a dark nature inside of my mind. I have to quell it so many times." This was interesting for T'Challa. Maybe she was correct and they were criminals. "You are dirty," said Ororo. "What?" T'Challa muttered, and he checked himself. She was right. Sand covered some of his body. "I can manipulate some water for you," said Ororo. "Thanks," said T'Challa. "Stand still," said Ororo, and she duplicated the act that she had done to herself. T'Challa's mind told him how the mini rain cloud was created, and that meant that the woman was extremely powerful. He washed the dirt off his clothes. "You have to clean your entire body," said Ororo. "Take off your clothes." T'Challa realized that shyness was not a part of the woman's character. He peeled off his uniform as Ororo looked on. Her eyes were glowing. T'Challa surmised that it was connected to the use of her extraordinary abilities. He also felt a closeness to the woman, like he was exposed in her presence before. It felt perfectly natural. "Give them to me," said Ororo and extended her hand. "I'll dry them." T'Challa gave her the uniform and looked on with curiosity. She held the clothes in her hands and concentrated. T'Challa sensed the heat generated by her body. "Are you finished?" he asked. "Yes," she responded. "So am I," he said, and he approached her. T'Challa was slightly taller than her and he was 6 feet tall. "Stand still. I'll dry you," said Ororo. She held his right shoulder and warm air swirled around T'Challa's body. In no time he was dry. Then Ororo headed for the shelter while he hurriedly dressed. She sat on the ground and shouted, "So do you have an idea of how to get out of here?" "Not as yet," said T'Challa confidently. "How about you?" "I was going with the wait-and-see approach for now," replied Ororo. "So what are we going to do in the meantime?" asked T'Challa. I want to test the extent of my abilities. I'll do that tomorrow. And the day after. I'll see what the day brings, replied Ororo. How do you plan to use the time? Watching you, replied T'Challa. She didn't seem to catch the joke. But for T'Challa it was much more serious. He didn't have technology or resources available to fashion a means of escape. I thought about searching underground, said Ororo. There aren't any caves, so I scratched that idea. T'Challa found that the underground search was an intelligent idea. It flipped the entire situation. We should leave it open, said T'Challa. You may be onto something. What about food? Asked Ororo. I believe that I can go a long while without it, said T'Challa. Can you? I don't know, but I draw strength from the planet, said Ororo. Chapter 3 I knew her, thought T'Challa as he watched Ororo. Her eyes were closed as she leaned on a rock. I don't remember how we first met, our first touch, or when we fell in love, but I know this woman intimately, thought T'Challa. His hyper-hearing indicated that Ororo was awake. He assumed that she was in mediation. He had the urge to confront her on the issue, but held back. Does she also feel the same way but isn't saying anything? T'Challa asked internally. We were lovers, said Ororo, and she opened her eyes slowly. I was thinking the same thing, said T'Challa. He went next to her. An electrical sensation erupted in his chest. I've been brooding over it since I saw your body, it looked like familiar territory to me, said Ororo. And I don't even know your name or where we are from. She held his cheek. T'Challa was struck with a terrible pain. It's troubling for me also, said T'Challa. With the barrier of strangers removed, nature took its course. He kissed her affectionately and she responded likewise. They took their time, savoring the emotional eruptions, hoping for more revelations. Someone had done a very cruel act to them, to deny a couple of their love and pit them against each other. Moments later, T'Challa and Ororo were making unbuckled and passionate love. Both knew where to touch to elicit pleasure in the other. Chapter 4 The next day Ororo and T'Challa traveled to the other side of the planet. T'Challa flew alongside her on the manipulated winds. Much to Ororo's surprise and delight, she felt the same exhilaration in T'Challa's love-making like she did in flying. Ororo dropped off T'Challa on a slope and she left her clothes with him. Then she headed a mile away in front of him. He had explained to her the level of his vision, which made it safe for him to view the test from a safe distance. Ororo hovered in the sky with her arms apart and she closed her eyes. She perceived the elemental forces as dials that she could turn. She turned them all on and to the maximum level. 5 colossal sandstorms formed a ring around her. A dark emotion swelled up inside and Ororo unscrewed the bottle that trapped the darkness. She felt the violent change in the weather. I am a storm, she thought. I will become the storm. Then she felt herself physically removed from the world. She opened her eyes and she was no longer in the reality she had known. She was in a dark realm. She looked at her body, all the flesh and bone had disappeared. A glittering humanoid mass was her new form. It's beautiful, she said. Suddenly she felt a shift in the new plane of the existence. The natural energy patterns were being disturbed and they reacted violently. I'm causing this, said Ororo. Maybe I calm them. She concentrated and found that when she pacified one area, another area would erupt in confusion. She could not grasp them all at once like a fist of God. She was in fact doing harm. I have to stop, she said. Ororo tried to reel in her dark nature, but it refused to return to its prison. She struggled against an almost overwhelming and sweet urge to remain free to do whatever she wanted. She was fighting dark temptation. "I will not be a destroyer," said Ororo. She willed the darkness back into the prison. Instantly the plane of reality returned to the real world. She was flesh and bone again. Yet she was exhausted and momentarily lost focus. The winds that held her up died, and so did the sandstorms. Gravity grappled her body and pulled her down mercilessly. She blanked out twice. "Everything is happening too quickly," she thought dreamily. She regained enough consciousness to manipulate the thermal winds, and they cushioned her free fall. The wind rushed against her face. She looked on helplessly as the earth grew nearer. Her world was spinning rapidly. Then she blanked out again. She was shaken awake by T'Challa. His face was covered with sand. "Can you hear me?" he asked. "Yes," she muttered. He lifted her up and carried her in his hands. "You nearly ripped apart the planet," said T'Challa gently. Ororo smiled a bit. "I went to another place. You should have seen it. It was like codes that ran a system." "I was a different being," said Ororo. "Did you lose control?" T'Challa asked. "Yes, and I had to restrain the dark force that I told you about," replied Ororo. He looked at her with concern. She was tired and wanted to rest. She fell asleep and dreamt about flying over the desert. Later she awoke with the sun blazing down on her. T'Challa had her in his arms as he withstood the brunt of the fireball. "It worked," he said. She held his face caringly. She saw the happiness in his eyes that she was alive and well. "How long was I under?" asked Ororo. "A few hours," replied T'Challa. Ororo was aware of the personal sacrifice he made for her well-being. "He loves me deeply," thought Ororo. She wondered if he felt intimidated by the grandeur of her abilities. She could crush him instantly. Was he afraid of her in some way? She wanted to know. "I'm more powerful than you. Honestly, how does that make you feel?" she asked with her hand still on his face. "It doesn't bother me," T'Challa replied. "I find that hard to believe," said Ororo with a smile. "You can't harm me, but I can destroy you." T'Challa grinned. "This might sound wrong, but I can shut down your vital systems, including your brain, with a single finger tap," he said. "How do you know that?" I know that my suit is insulated from your lightning and that I'm faster than you." Ororo placed her next hand on his face. "You are a piece of work," Ororo said. "That thing you did last night to my body. That was a finger tap too." "Yes," T'Challa, and kissed her forehead. "Then we are both dangerous in our own right," said Ororo. "I guess so," said T'Challa. Chapter 5. 2 days eventually became a week, and 1 week turned into 3. When the couple wasn't making love, they spent their time building a large shelter, their home. Ororo brought the massive rocks from far distances with tornadoes, and T'Challa lifted them into place. After a month, the crude and small horseshoe-shaped shelter was now a grand hall. Hunger was a major factor that they coped with. T'Challa was gradually dwindling in size. Ororo's loss of weight was less apparent. A torturous rationalization loomed over them, and it was that T'Challa would die from hunger first. Whoever placed the couple on the planet wanted them to die slowly. Without the full knowledge of their past, Ororo and T'Challa faced a bleak future. Suicide was not even considered. Both had resigned to battle on until the bitter end. With the shelter completed, the couple had a general lack of activity. They usually slept all day, and the imposed laziness made them even sicker. "I guess we were very active people," said T'Challa once. "Remember, you presumed that we were warriors," said Ororo. T'Challa recalled the statement. "Great warriors," said T'Challa. "I wonder if there were other couples like us," said Ororo. Probably, said T'Challa. If we knew them, then most likely they are looking for us, said Ororo. An optimistic expression came on T'Challa's face. You're right. So we definitely have to hold out, said Ororo. Hope of rescue carried them through the second month, but by the fourth month the chances seemed slim. On the first day of the fifth month an object blocked out the sun. Ororo sensed the object and T'Challa heard the murmur of its engines. The couple exited the shelter and gazed at a spaceship. The vessel came directly overhead. The ship was flat and semicircular. I think we should keep our guard up. They might be our rescuers or the ones responsible for our predicament, said T'Challa weakly. I agree, said Ororo. A person appeared in front of them. He was a bird-like humanoid. Dark circles lined his eyes. Ororo and T'Challa, he said like they were last people he expected to see. Is that our names? Asked T'Challa. Yes, replied the alien. How do you know us? Asked Ororo. Who doesn't know you? Half the known universe is looking for you. Chapter 6. An hour later, T'Challa and Ororo were on the medical ward of the Shi'ar research ship. T'Challa went over his name a couple of times and the woman's name was Ororo. After spending so long on the planet, the entire rescue seemed like a dream. Ororo rested comfortably on the bed next to him. She was also undergoing brain scans to find out the reason for the memory loss. They held hands across the small space that was between them. The ship's captain came in when the scans were completed. His name was Ragul. He saw to it that the couple were fed and cleaned up before the scans. How did you find us? Asked T'Challa. We had a probe in this solar system and it picked up atmospheric anomalies on the planet that you were on. It took us a while to get here. Then we saw your home on the surface, replied the Ragul. I have sent a message to the Kree command telling them of your rescue. Are you taking us to the Kree? Asked Ororo. No. You're going straight to Earth. Those were the orders I got from the government, replied Ragul. We are that important? Said Ororo. Yes. You know the king and queen personally, said Ragul. Any ideas who did to us? Asked T'Challa. Well, there was also a reward for any information on the whereabouts of Thanos and someone called Raven since they were involved in your disappearance, responded Ragul. I can't put faces to those names, said T'Challa. The same here, said Ororo. Who is Thanos? A dangerous manic, replied Ragul. So we were protectors, said Ororo. Probably, said Ragul. Are there more protectors like us? Asked T'Challa. Yes, replied Ragul. I hope that we can get our memories back, said Ororo. As for the scans, they will only serve to tell us if there are any mechanical devices in your brains. The medical facilities on your world will better study your biology, said Ragul. Are our species spacefarers as well? Asked T'Challa. No. Only a few of your kind travel in space, answered Ragul. Well, thank you for all that you have done, said Ororo. I have to admit that there is also a reward for finding you, said Ragul with a grin. T'Challa and Ororo had a few more questions for him and then he left. The information swirled around in T'Challa's mind. Human, Earth, Thanos and Raven, said T'Challa. We're going home, said Ororo. What will be waiting for us? Asked T'Challa. Who knows, said Ororo. I'm just glad that we survived the ordeal. For the duration of the trip the couple explored the planetary research vessel. The impending moment when they would meet their past weighed on them. They were certain that things would never be the same. They were forever changed by the memory losses. The captain called them to the bridge and he told them that the ship traveled through hyperspace. They were about to enter human space. T'Challa and Ororo viewed the passing star lights from a wide window. Suddenly the lights stopped and a blue planet appeared. "That is Earth," said Ragul. "We will dock at the Peak Space Station. They handle relations between Earth and the rest of the universe." Ororo went closer to the window and she pressed her hand on it. Then she returned to T'Challa's side. "I don't remember it," she said. "Neither me," said T'Challa. Chapter 7 Ororo and T'Challa were escorted to the chief room of the space station. They met a green-haired woman, a young ebony woman, a 15-year-old boy wearing a visor and a man who also wore a visor. "First thing," said the green-haired woman. "Do you recognize any of us?" "No," replied Ororo. "Wow. Well, I'm Brand, the head of operations at the facility." She pointed at the young woman. "That's Shuri, the boy is Umba and that gentleman is Scott Summers." Shuri approached the couple and hugged them. "I'm so glad that you're back," said Shuri. "We have to get back to Wakanda to fix this problem." "Wakanda?" asked T'Challa. "That's where you are from. You and Ororo are its leaders." "I'm your sister. Umba is your ward and Ororo's cousin and Scott is our friend," said Shuri. "This might be a bit too much for them right now," said Scott. Umba went to Ororo and hugged her. She returned the favor, but she didn't feel any emotion for him, much less the rest of the group. They were strangers. "I have to do this all over again. Familiarize myself with them and hope it triggers something," thought Ororo. 30 minutes later, the group headed to the African nation Wakanda. Shuri told Ororo and T'Challa about the search operation. Nova from the Space Corps and the Guardians of the Galaxy sent word to S.W.O.R.D and everyone that the couple was missing and that Thanos was behind it. Nova's contact on Earth, Captain America, then informed Shuri and the X-Men about the disappearance. Ororo would have never imagined that she held such a high position and with such people around her. Shuri, Umba, and Scott were likable. She wondered what Wakanda would be like. Ororo peered out of the plane's side window. They were entering the Earth's atmosphere. She plugged into the elemental energy. The world felt ill. It was not as pure as the desert planet. The following hours were spent meeting unfamiliar people. Everyone was told that the couple needed time for adjustment. The medical scans stated that the memory loss was permanent. The couple would have to relearn everything. A library of videos, files, and books were given them to cover their history and the world's. Ororo found it hard to read the materials. She told T'Challa and he had a similar feeling. The couple was robbed of the experiences that they shared with their loved ones. It was horrific. Yet everyone considered it a miracle that Ororo and T'Challa were able to know that they were in love despite the memory loss. Ororo's mother-in-law suggested that the reason for the pair knowing that they were lovers was due to a spiritual bond that no one could tear apart. Next story, To Kill a Raven Chapter 1 Hong Kong. Abraham Hunter aka White Wolf knew that he was being followed in the Temple Street night market where bargain hunters sauntered shoulder to shoulder in the narrow street to buy produce and cheap general items from brightly lit stalls. Apart from being Caucasian, White Wolf was 6 feet 3 inches, which made him very noticeable. He wore a brown jacket and worn jeans. Ordinarily he would be taken for a tourist. But this section of the night market was controlled by a Triad Hong Kong offshoot. What made this branch of the Triad special was that it was run by a 93-year-old called the Abbot. The Abbot was rumored to be meta-human and deadly with his hands even at his old age. White Wolf had an appointment with the Abbot to purchase a map to a place called Kunlun. Kunlun was said to contain several legendary weapons that White Wolf was interested in. The Abbot operated out of a general store called the Zao Dragon, it was nothing fancy, just a black building with golden dragons on the windows and incense smoke that swirled inside of it. A middle-aged man was sweeping behind the counter when White Wolf entered. The place was cramped for space and White Wolf moved sideways to get down the aisles. White Wolf approached the gentleman and smelt the gun oil that resided behind the counter. "Good night," White Wolf said in good Chinese. "Good night," said the man, and he eased up to the counter. Click was the soft sound like a whisper that played on White Wolf's hyper hearing. The safety catch was unlocked from the gun behind the counter. White Wolf took a broken coin from his pocket and placed it on the counter. The coin was from the Hung dynasty and piece of the emperor's head was visible in the brown metal work. The man pressed a button underneath the counter and a door opened next to him. "Go down the corridor," said the man. White Wolf peered into the area the man pointed into. A dim red fluorescent bulb lit the way. He smelt cigarette smoke at the far end. Then he smelled fresh blood, lots of it. He looked suspiciously at the man. Go on," said the man. Never a coward, White Wolf walked down the corridor. He wanted to see what was on the other end of the mystery. He came upon a wooden door that was half opened. He pushed it gently and the scent of blood grew stronger. He glanced back at the front store man who beckoned him to continue. "Well, this is interesting," thought White Wolf. He ventured further and a flight of stairs appeared by the door. The place was so quiet that the sound of the boots boomed on the stairs. All the blood and body scents were centered in the room that was at the top of the stairs. The doorway was ajar. White Wolf kicked it with the toe of his boot. 5 dead bodies were inside of the room. The abbot was on a prayer mat next to a wall and he had a gaping gunshot wound to the forehead. His henchmen carried similar wounds. Then White Wolf sensed another person in the room, on the left side in the shadows. 2 silenced shots came from the area. White Wolf lunged forward and in the same motion drew his handgun from the holster in the jacket. Then he fired at his attacker, making sure to bunch his shots for the upper torso. The attacker was struck and made an escape through a door that seemed to appear out of nowhere to White Wolf. In fleeting seconds, he was on his feet and gave chase. A minute seemed to pass as he scurried down a narrow staircase and then ended up on the sidewalk. The assailant had vanished, but he still had the scent. He holstered the gun and made to move into the crowd when an elderly woman held his arm. Then another stranger came from behind and grabbed his throat. At first White Wolf thought that they were undercover agents, but more ordinary people were attacking him and he realized that they were being mind-controlled. They meant to kill him. White Wolf tore his arm away from the old woman and fired the gun into her chest. He slipped a small knife from his waist and slit the throat of a man on his left. Then he mule-kicked with his right boot the groin of the attacker behind him. With the limited space, he activated the teleportation system on his watch. He slid his finger on the touch screen and he vanished. He reappeared on the building across the street. He was certain that the person behind the mind control was in the vicinity and he found the scoundrel. The person was crouched in an alley that faced the spot where the crowd had attacked. White Wolf studied the bulletproof skin suit that the person wore. Moreover, the person was a female. A playful smile formed on White Wolf's face. He placed the knife back into his belt and then he leapt off the building. He landed silently next to the woman and locked her head in his arms. "Don't move, sweetheart," said White Wolf. He assumed that she had taken the map to Kunlun and had waited to kill him in order to tie up loose ends. "The map or your life," said White Wolf. The woman slowly opened a pouch on the left leg and took out a flat triangular object. Bronze dragon scales decorated the object, which appeared antique. White Wolf snatched the item from her. "Now what's your name?" Bang! Bang! A burning sensation came over White Wolf's left shoulder. He instinctively stepped away from the woman and fired in the direction that the shots came from. He saw a police officer firing at him. Undoubtedly the officer was mind-controlled. White Wolf steadied himself and shot the officer in the throat. Then he returned his attention to the woman, but she had disappeared. He noticed that the map was not in his hand, it must have dropped. Fuck, thought White Wolf. He touched the wrist teleporter and it took him to the apartment suite that he rented in upscale Hong Kong. He took off the jacket and examined the shoulder wound. He was lucky that the bullet didn't damage his collarbone. The bullet missed all the vital areas and exited his shoulder. White Wolf patched up the wound quickly. Then he relaxed on a sofa and contemplated on what had happened in the last 30 minutes. Who was that woman? He asked. Chapter 2 Raven's attitude mirrored T'Challa's and it caused a moral dilemma for him. Committing what others may consider evil acts was not new to T'Challa. The most evil thing that T'Challa ever did was to crash the world economy so that he could get the better of an enemy. On another occasion he threatened to destroy Wakanda and was even willing to sacrifice Ororo. They were cold and difficult decisions that were done to safeguard a larger number of lives. The only difference between him and Raven was that sacrificing people was the ultimate last resort for him, whereas it was the first option for Raven. T'Challa suspected that Ororo also saw the connection with Raven. Ororo had also killed a few innocent people in pursuit of a greater good. Thankfully Shuri had never made such a decision. T'Challa hoped that it would remain that way. Another issue with Raven was that she operated an organization that defended the world from threats. That situation made going after her even cloudier. T'Challa looked up from the table and he studied Ororo and Shuri as they watched the flow chart that was on the table. The three of them were in a private room in the administrative building. For the sake of clarity, said Shuri, we should state our objectives. Do we want to kill or capture her? Capture is the priority, replied Ororo. I know what you are getting at. Why are we doing this when she does not pose a direct threat to us? Don't get me wrong. She had tried to kill you and a measure of vengeance should be administered and I'm ready to help. But the goody part of me still has doubts, said Shuri. As do I, said Ororo. Yet the overriding feeling is that Raven can't be left on the loose. Well, that settles it, said Shuri. Not really, we have not decided on what becomes of the organization, said T'Challa. That is a problem, said Shuri, and she bit her lip. I was thinking of finding someone suitable to replace Raven, but T'Challa wants to strip down the organization's assets, said Ororo. We have not reached a consensus as yet. That's so odd. I have to take a moment to digest that you have a disagreement over something, said Shuri. We disagree all the time, said T'Challa. Really, when was the last time you disagreed on something of this magnitude? Asked Shuri. T'Challa stared blankly at her. I didn't think so, said Shuri. We will cross that bridge when we get to it, said T'Challa. It's worse than I thought, said Shuri with a smile. I hope that the council doesn't pick up on this schism, said Shuri. So this entire discussion just got shifted to our relationship, said Ororo. What about your relationship with Shuri? Shot her a sharp stare and pouted for Ororo to hush in a playful manner. Relationship with who? Asked T'Challa as he eased forward. Nobody, replied Shuri. Ororo was just talking. T'Challa looked at Ororo. My lips are sealed, said Ororo. T'Challa's watch beeped. It was the alarm he had set for the council meeting. Keeping secrets from me, all right, I'll take it, said T'Challa. He packed up the flow chart and rose. Ororo was just playing around. Weren't you? Ororo drew back her snow-white hair from her left eye. Sure I was, she said. 2 minutes later, T'Challa and Ororo strolled over the pathway to the council hall. Lances of the sunlight came through the transparent ceiling and they fell on the short palms that bordered the pathway. T'Challa read through the daily security tidbits on his kimoyo. The strangest bulletin was about a known triad leader in Hong Kong being murdered. It appeared that one of his bodyguards did the deed and then committed suicide. There was a shooting outside the leader's hideout in downtown Hong Kong where a policeman was severely wounded, but there were no eyewitnesses. The report stated that it was odd that the meta-human leader would be killed by a mere bodyguard. T'Challa put the kimoyo away and rested his hand on Ororo's forearm. Their arms were locked as they walked stride for stride. Ororo wore a blue dress with an exposed stomach. Her mind seemed to be somewhere far. "Anything the matter?" asked T'Challa. "I was thinking about Umba," replied Ororo. T'Challa didn't know how to respond. He shouldn't downplay her concerns since it had only been a few days since Umba left and he respected her thoughts. In the end he made a sound that acknowledged her statement. A moment of silence passed. "Well, aren't you going to say something?" asked Ororo. "We have to adjust," T'Challa said.